Chapter 1305. Little fellow, you just fought with a golden titan, yet you're still so fierce. You're in good shape. Savorius moved left and right within the flames as he attacked Grimm with vulgar words. To be honest, even he was starting to admire this legendary fire shaman from the central continent. He had witnessed the terrifying might of the golden titan with his own eyes. If Patriarch Monash was willing to join the Magus Association, his individual battle prowess would definitely be in the top 5. As for the legendary fire shaman Grimm, even Savorius did not know much about him and could not estimate his true strength. However, Savorius dared to guarantee that Grimm's individual battle prowess was not any weaker than the top 3 freaks in the Magus Association. On the other hand, Savorius could only settle for 4th place. This meant that Grimm's true battle prowess was above Savorius's. If not for the fact that Grimm had fought with Monash for so long, Savorius would not have jumped out to be used. However, contrary to his expectations, this legendary fire shaman was still so ferocious despite being at the end of his tether. He could not help but secretly look at the 2 balls of light in Grimm's body that were as bright as small suns. An elemental magus from a scattered tower forest with no background and no one to rely on actually had 2 transcendent artifacts. One of them was an origin artifact, while the other was a soul equipment. This fellow was so rich that even Savorius, a genius from the Magus Association, could not compare to him. Every time Savorius thought about this, he would roar in his heart. Damn, why did so many good things fall into this bastard's hands? The Magus world's consciousness was too biased. However, just as this thought surfaced in his mind, Savorius could not help but curse inwardly. This was not the outer realm, and the consciousness of the plane could not do anything about it. This was the Magus world, a world ruled by the Magus will. Secretly cursing the consciousness of the plane in such a world, Savorius, who was in the midst of turning invisible to dodge Grimm's lava fireball, suddenly felt a pain in his body. His body that had almost turned invisible was suddenly beaten back to its original state. The few wisps of plane law aura in his body had unexpectedly fused together, breaking through the restraints of the power of the curse and causing a ruckus. That was why his voidification failed. Plain consciousness, you bastard. Savorius' expression changed drastically, and he didn't even have time to use other means to escape before he was hit head-on by the lava fireball. Violent and ferocious magic flames scattered in all directions, riddling Savorius' thin body with holes. As for the boiling hot magma inside the fireball, he accepted all of it without leaving a single trace behind. Like a black-skinned baboon, Savorius screamed miserably as he dashed around in the depths of the sea of fire. No matter where the pieces of black robe that fell off his body landed, they would melt everything into a thick black liquid filled with a foul and pungent smell amid strange corrosive noises. It hurts so much, it really hurts. Savorius howled for a long time before using a massive amount of curse power to neutralize the law of fire that had invaded his body. However, just as he resolved his internal problems, he felt the sea of fire around him suddenly stagnate. Savorius turned around in horror, and what he saw was a huge lava palm that almost covered his entire field of vision. Bang! With an earth-shattering sound, the lava palm fell from the sky and slammed Savorius into the ground below him. Flames surged and lava surged on the giant lava palm, quickly scorching the entire ground. Even the void became distorted and blurred amidst the crackling sounds of burning. Sizzle! A strange sound rang out, and large clouds of black smoke escaped from the gaps in the lava palm, escaping in all directions as if they had a mind of their own. After a while, they reformed a kilometer away from the lava giant, revealing Savorius' miserable and broken body. Bastard! Bastard! How dare you destroy my body? I'm going to curse you. While angrily cursing Grimm, Savorius reached out and condensed the Book of Curses out of thin air. However, as soon as the thick Book of Curses entered his hand, he suddenly stopped cursing. The Book of Curses in his hand which had a black cover with red edges and a long string of twisted and crooked mysterious runes engraved on its cover, had actually been damaged. Perhaps Grimm's molten giant's attack was too violent, but the Vulcan orb's law of fire had actually invaded the Book of Curses' main body. The left corner of the Book of Curses was visibly scorched, and some of the pages were smoking as if they were on the verge of being ignited. Ah, my Book of Curses! I'll curse you for 10,000 years. The Book of Curses was Savorius' soul equipment, and the damage to the Book of Curses meant that his soul was damaged. Any damage to one's soul was not to be underestimated. Hence, Savorius no longer dared to act recklessly. With a roar and the most vicious curse, his body turned into a plume of black smoke and shot into the sky, fleeing toward a certain place outside the battlefield. Savorius had actually escaped. At that moment, countless strange voices cursed Savorius in the depths of their hearts. Inside the crystal airship hidden in the sky above the gravel valley, the Grade 4 puppeteer Tatas cursed angrily. F*CKU Savorius. You only know how to boast. You can't even defeat a magus at the end of his tether. I curse all the women in your family. The commander of the airship, who had been drenched in Tatas spittle, immediately bowed and asked, "My lord, do you think we should still take action? Take action. Take action, my ass. You bastard. Can't you see that the situation is already out of control? If Savorius had won, we might have gotten a super powerhouse for free and brought Grimm into the alliance. Now that Savorius has escaped, what else can we do here? Let's get ready to return." Tatas's rage grew even greater. Although the Silver Alliance had sent him out to observe the Central Continent's future, he could also intervene in the battle as an inspector if necessary. However, at the end of the day, Tatas was only a Grade 4 puppeteer. He was still a long way from becoming a super powerhouse. If he really wanted to charge down and attack, Tatas gulped as he looked at the tall molten giant standing proudly at the end of his line of sight. He even found it difficult to breathe. At this moment, Tatas wasn't the only one sighing like him. Even the hidden witch of death, Thuna, couldn't help but sigh. "My lord, that Grimm doesn't seem to be able to hold on much longer. What do you think?" The Tier 3 witch said as she peered into the distance, her face filled with excitement. Super powerhouse, Golden Titan, transcendent divine weapon, the power of laws. A battle of this level might not even be seen in 1,000 years. But she had never heard of such a thing in the hundreds of years since she was born. Others couldn't see it, but she could feel the aura of the power of laws up close. This honor and fervor made her want to participate in it. She naturally didn't have the power to participate in a battle of this level, but Thuna beside her had enough power to change everything. Charge out. Defeat these wizards. Trample all the losers under my feet. She thought about it in a daze, and her body couldn't help but heat up. However, in the next moment, her enthusiasm was extinguished by a cold glare from Thuna. "Idiot," Thuna said coldly. "I'll defeat Grimm, and then what?" "Then," the Tier 3, which said in shock, "wasn't the glory of defeating a super powerhouse enough? That was a super powerhouse. Have you considered the consequences of me defeating Grimm? What we're facing now isn't a battle between families, but a battle for the control of the Central Continent. If I defeat Grimm, it means that the scattered Tower Forest's existing forces and the new forces that Grimm represents will both suffer great losses. Grimm will definitely return to the Crimson family to protect himself. What will Fred and the others do? Their own power is no longer enough to fight against Grimm. This was clearly shown in today's battle. What will they do? Either they escape, or they bring in external forces to balance out Grimm's threat. Who do you think they'll choose among the 3 major wizard organizations? Hearing Thuna's cold and emotionless question, the Tier 3, which finally came to her senses. She lowered her head and thought, "It can't be us Northern Witches. We Northern Witches don't have a good relationship with those fellows in the scattered Tower Forest. Even if they're in trouble, they won't ask us for help. It's unlikely that it'll be the Wizard Association. After all, the Wizard Association is a powerful organization. It's easy for them to invite us in, but it's hard for them to send us away. If the Wizard Association really reaches out their hand, no matter if they win or lose, the scattered Tower Forest will have nothing to do with them. In my opinion, it's most likely that they'll ask for help from the Silver Alliance. The members of a Silver Alliance are all very greedy. It's not impossible for them to spend more resources and money to invite a superpower house to help them. After a simple analysis, the Tier 3 witch's face turned even paler. She immediately knew that she had been too rash. This was not a simple battle between powerhouses, but a power struggle that could decide the dominance of a large area. This war could even affect the strength of the three great Magus organizations. Hence, the higher-ups in all areas had to be cautious. The idea she had just come up with was undoubtedly a rotten idea for all the witches in the northern region. Chapter 1306. Just as the onlookers were hesitating, the battle on the battlefield quickly became clear. First, he fought head-on with Monash's Golden Titan. Then, half of his body was contaminated by Savorius's Book of Curses. Although Grimm's molten giant form was still as powerful as ever, his actual strength had fallen to rock bottom. However, with 2 Grade 5 divine weapons as his foundation, he was still a powerful being no matter how weak he was. Hence, when he was free to intervene in the battle between Mary, Fred, and the others, it could be said that he swept the battlefield and crushed all of them. No one could resist his exploding fireball that was imbued with the law of fire. No one could dispel the terrifying and ferocious law of fire. The first to escape was Matthew. He was entangled by Remy, the plague spirit, and before he could escape, he was engulfed by a fireball that Grimm hurled at him from the air. Fire was easy to defend against, but law of fire was hard to defend against. Although Matthew had mastered the law of fire for hundreds of years, he was as childish as a baby when it came to using the law of fire. He could not condense a pure law of fire to protect himself. Hence, in the face of the surging magical flames and the law of fire, Matthew's fire barrier and elemental protection broke like an eggshell. Then, he did not even have the time to scream before the violent flames engulfed his body. Matthew cried out in pain and struggled to break free from the sea of flames. He screamed in pain as he escaped into the distance. Anyone with a discerning eye could see that the moment he escaped, his body had been burnt to a crisp. There were still a few terrifying flames flickering on the surface of his body. It was obvious that his body had been invaded by the law of fire. Even if he escaped back to his family, he would not be able to get rid of the law of fire without a few years of recuperation. With Matthew as an example, the other magi on the battlefield immediately felt insecure. The second to be targeted by Grimm was Elder Nicholas, who had always been hostile to the Crimson family. In the past few conflicts between the Scattered Tower Forest and the Crimson Empire, Elder Nicholas' figure could be seen behind the scenes. The other party was obviously afraid of Grimm as well. As soon as he saw Grimm's burning eyes glancing at him, he immediately crushed a scallop-shaped wizard artifact in his hand without hesitation and disappeared into the surging fog. He had really escaped, because even his soul aura had completely disappeared from the battlefield. It was as if a bomb had been turned on, and the rest of the wizards panicked even more. Before Grimm could turn his cannon around, they had already escaped from the battlefield one by one. In the end, the only one left was the body refinement sorcerer Fabris, whose face was ashen and eyes were filled with panic. Fabris was a typical anatomy refinement sorcerer. He did not have as many sorcery techniques as elemental sorcerers and could move around in an instant. Feng tried to flee the battlefield, but the Tier 4 Thunder Dragon arms had him pinned down. His panicked state of mind prevented him from tangling with the Tier 4 Thunder Dragon. On one hand, he had to be wary of Grimm's invisible fireball, and on the other hand, he had to find an opportunity to escape the battlefield. Before he could find an opportunity, he was besieged by Mary and Witch Clara. The Tier 4 Thunder Dragon arms, Blood Queen Mary, and Witch Clara. Under the combined attacks of the three, Fabris, who had a body of steel, was unsurprisingly defeated. He was very lucky not to become a victim of Grimm's Law of Fire. But at the same time, he was also very unlucky to become a test subject for the Law of Thunder, Blood Queen Mary, and which Clara's law of darkness. Thus, Fabris screamed miserably as he fell from the sky, creating a deep crater on the ground. His body was wrapped in dazzling lightning, and the wounds on his body were bright red and glaring blood. In the middle of his forehead, a pitch-black and deep strange rune appeared, making his consciousness even more muddled and chaotic. A physique refinement sorcerer that focused on strength, had short legs, and was not as fast as Mary, who focused on agility. Thus, he became the only high-ranked captive in this unparalleled battle in the central continent. When the battlefield was cleared, which Clara slowly floated away from Mary and the others, silently watching Grimm, who had turned into a molten giant. She could sense that he was already riddled with injuries, and his spirit was dispirited. But under the cover of the surging flames, no one could see Grimm's true condition through the protection of the law. Thus, they had no way of knowing how serious his injuries were. Whether it was a normal small injury, a serious injury that damaged his body, or a super serious injury that affected the source of a sorcerer. The true condition of Grimm would affect the attitude of the major factions towards the Crimson family in the future. If it was in the past, Clara would have used all her strength to beat this legendary fire wizard until he was lying on the ground. But now, both sides were in the same boat. Even Clara could not help but worry about Grimm's injuries. However, other than being concerned, Clara was also carefully guarding against Kieran. After all, there had been too many conflicts between the two sides. Even if they had reached an agreement on the battlefield, it was still uncertain whether the other side would accept it or not. Thus, which Clara could only retreat to the side and silently wait for Grimm's response. Although he was mentally exhausted, Grimm still forced himself to deal with the matters on the battlefield. It could not be helped. This was a battle between high-ranked sorcerers. If he, the head of the family, did not express his stance, the remaining people could not represent the will of the entire Crimson family. Which Clara, our agreement still stands. My Crimson family will immediately form an alliance with you. Hearing Grimm's words, Clara, who had been on high alert, finally relaxed and felt her body relax. Although these Tier 4 sorcerers usually acted high and mighty, if they chose the wrong side when it came to a crucial issue, even an ancient family with thousands of years of history and a majestic foundation would be reduced to ashes in an instant, leaving not a single tile behind. The danger of a battle between high-ranked sorcerers was not any less than the plots and schemes between apprentices. If the latter were to fail, the worst that could happen would be the death of one person. However, if the former were to fail, a large family with thousands of people would fall apart. Anyone who had a trace of bloodline with the loser would not be able to escape the fate of being exterminated. As for the change of dynasties in the mortal world, the number of people that would be implicated would be even more terrifying. Although the cause of the entire incident was the battle between the Crimson family and the Randner family, it had developed into a battle for dominance between the Crimson family and the established forces represented by the Crimson family, which Clara had switched sides at the crucial moment and stood on the right side. This undoubtedly protected the rights of the Randner family to continue passing down their lineage. As for the escaped freed and the others, as well as the captured Fabris, their families immediately fell into a precarious situation. Whether they survived or perished, whether they lived or died, all depended on Grimm's decision. Mary, stay here and take care of the matters on the battlefield. There's no harm in listening to which Clara's opinion on the follow-up matters of the Central Continent. I won't be staying here any longer. Grimm gave a simple explanation and swept his gaze across the surrounding areas of the battlefield. After confirming that he did not miss anything, his body suddenly exploded into a huge ball of flames. When the flames slowly dissipated, Grimm's traces could no longer be found at the scene. Within the blazing flame throne, Grimm, who had returned to his human form, stumbled into Alice's arms as soon as he appeared. Large amounts of purplish-black blood spurted out from the numerous wounds on his body, dyeing the two of them in a flash. Grimm had fainted the moment he teleported back. "Helen, hurry up and help." Alice resisted the discomfort of the putrid blood and yelled urgently, I'm coming. How did this fellow make such a mess?" The power of law in his body is so chaotic. Helen, who had a pair of thin wings, pointed the magic wand in her hand at Grim and cast a levitation spell. Unfortunately, as soon as the magic light entered Grim's body, it was shattered by the chaotic power of the laws within. Grim, who had just become a little lighter, suddenly tilted to the side and almost knocked down the frail Alice. Helen, are you going to help or cause trouble? Seeing that her lover was so badly injured and miserable, tears welled up in Alice's eyes. She lost her usual patience and calmness. The power of law in his body has gone out of control. My magic can't work on him anymore. Little Helen, who had always been carefree, felt so wrong that she almost burst into tears after being lectured by her usually amiable contract companion. At this time, it was Lucia, who had been watching silently from the side, who could not stand it anymore. Arcane Enhancement. An instant cast rank 2 arcane spell instantly increased Alice's vitality and strength by more than 5 points. Relying on this bit of arcane enhancement, Alice barely managed to lift Grim up and carried him to the big bed in the residence. After placing him down steadily, Alice gently took off her robe and finally could not hold back the tears that she had been suppressing for a long time. Grim originally had a majestic body that was not any weaker than a rank 2 anatomy refinery wizard. However, at this moment his body was riddled with wounds and his flesh was a mess. It was as if he had been thrown into a roller knife and twisted. There were terrifying scratches everywhere that could reach the bones and huge wounds that looked like the lips of a baby. Blood was still gushing out from the wound. After flowing for so long, the blood that came out was still purplish-black and had a strong stench. One look, and one could tell that it was filled with terrifying life toxins. What was more terrifying was that all the wounds that could be seen with the naked eye were wrapped in strands of black gas. Many parts of the flesh had turned black and green, emitting a horrible smell similar to the stench of a corpse. Chapter 1307. If Grim's injuries were just ordinary elemental injuries, no matter how serious his injuries were, even if he was on the verge of death, as long as he drank a bottle of powerful healing potion, he would still be full of vigor and vitality the next day. Unfortunately, what was really ravaging Grim's body was not the elemental injuries, but the mutated and twisted magical laws. It was also because of their existence that Grim's injuries became so severe and difficult to deal with. Even Alice did not know how to deal with him. Most of the magical laws had been broken into countless broken pieces, entangling Grim's bones, tendons, organs, chest, and flesh like maggots. They perfectly combined with Grim's flesh and energy, continuously triggering the mutation of the magical laws. Because of these magical laws, Grim's injuries could not be healed, and the life system in his body was completely disrupted. That was why he was in such an unmanageable situation. Facing such injuries, no magic or potions could work. Only by destroying these magical laws bit by bit could Grim's life system start working again and slowly recover. Grim was put on a rough stone table with difficulty. At this moment, he was completely unconscious. He was lying there naked, unconscious. Alice, who had changed into a dark-colored wizard robe, was holding a large basin of clanking metal instruments in her hands, which were placed heavily on the edge of the stone table. The smart and lively little Helen was waving her magic wand, setting up tens of bright but not dazzling illumination magic circles around the stone table, illuminating the surroundings of the stone table and the body of the naked fruit man inside the secret room. Lucia, who was Alice's disciple, was wandering around idly. After all, this was the residence of a high-grade wizard, and any item stored here would be a rare resource that tens of thousands of people would fight over. Although she could not use most of the items, she was satisfied just by looking at them and touching them. However, even though she was pretending to be calm as she strolled around, her gaze would always involuntarily drift towards the body of the scarlet mantis fruit lying on the stone platform. It was a strong and energetic male body, The muscles on Chi Guolu's body were well-defined, strong, and plump. The lines of his muscles were smooth and well-proportioned, tall and strong. His face couldn't be considered handsome, but his nose and eyes were sharp, giving him a masculine feeling. His originally healthy and muscular body was now covered with large and small wounds, and every wound had wisps of black or gray smoke curling around it. Every time the muscles near the wound pulled out a thin granulation, trying to wrap around it and heal, the smoke would swarm up and release a series of light explosions. As a result, the wound was still a wound, and the purplish-black blood continued to flow out like a gurgling stream. He was the murderer who destroyed the arcane kingdom. Lucia pondered silently. After reading so many witchcraft books under Alice's guidance, Lucia had a different perspective on everything that had happened in the Arcane Empire. In the past, she was just one of the many ignorant arcana apprentices who lacked a clear and direct understanding of the complexity and vastness of the multiverse. However, now that she had the opportunity to stand on the shoulders of another highly developed wizard civilization, Lucia understood the meaning of civilization and how difficult it was to achieve it. Not every larva could grow into a beautiful butterfly smoothly. Even many larvae had just been born and hadn't reached the threshold of quantitative change to qualitative change before they fell under the claws of many fierce hunters. The severely injured man lying on the stone table in front of her was the terrible flame giant who was tens of meters tall in her memory. He had personally destroyed the Arcane Academy, burned her most respected Lord Brown, and destroyed her life with his own hands. In Lucia's mind, the man's figure was superimposed with the flame man in her memory, which made her a little helpless. He turned out to be teacher Alice's lover. It was also he who brought her soul back to the wizard world, so that she had the opportunity to get a new life in this strange world. National hatred, family hatred, plus her own death, he couldn't get away with it. For a moment, even Lucia didn't know what kind of attitude she should have toward this guy. When Lucia was in a mess and didn't know what she should do, what she wanted to do, or what she could do, Alice called out to her with a frown. "Lucia, don't just stand there. Come and help." Help? Lucia had lost her usual liveliness. She moved to the stone table stiffly like a marionette, her eyes drifting left and right. She really didn't know where to look. At this moment, Alice had transformed into a butcher whose hands were stained with blood, and she was wantonly slaughtering the man's body on the stone platform. Grimm's constitution was as high as 34, which made his body as tough as magic alloy. Finally, Lucia got rid of the girl's shyness and the strange hatred, and recovered the curiosity of a level 2 arcanist. Yes, during the time when she was learning from Alice, her arcana skills had improved by leaps and bounds, as if she was using a cheat code. Now, she was a level 2 arcanist and a level 1 wizard. It was a very strange part-time job, and also a unique one in the sorcerer world. No, to be more precise, it should be unprecedented, but not impossible. Lucia's existence opened up a new power system for the sorcerer world. Very soon, a brand new power system would appear in the Magus world's original classification of professions, arcane magi. Lucia, on the other hand, was the well-deserved pioneer and leader of this new force. Of course, this was not what Lucia had expected or dreamed of. Lucia shook her head to get rid of those unnecessary emotions. She recovered the curiosity that an arcanist should have, and slowly began to focus on the perfect male body in front of her. It was really perfect, to be honest. Even if Lucia let go of her imagination and tried to describe a perfect male body, she would not be able to reach the level of this male body in front of her. Lucia reached out her hand and gently touched the man's arm. The muscles were firm and elastic, and the surface was smooth and delicate. There was a faint layer of energy on it. Looking at it carefully, perhaps the details of this man's body were far more perfect than most women who were famous for their beauty. However, the soft touch was just an illusion. When Lucia used a little more strength, the muscles on the man's arm only slightly caved in, and then could not go any further. Lucia's expression changed slightly, and the strength in her hand increased. Unfortunately, the slightly caved muscles did not move at all, as if they could not feel the change in Lucia's strength. Lucia's expression changed again. She picked up a sharp silver knife on the operating table and used the sharp point to lightly poke the man's arm. Similarly, the muscles only slightly caved in and then did not move at all. Lucia simply held her silver knife horizontally and began to cut her opponent's arm with all her might. The sharp knife blade cut the soft and tough skin, producing a dull sound and dazzling sparks, as if old cowhide was being cut. Although Lucia had used all her strength, unfortunately, she still could not cut the man's skin. On the contrary, because she used too much strength, the silver knife's edge was obviously damaged. Was the physical quality of a high-grade wizard so terrifying? Lucia's face finally showed a shocked expression. High-grade wizards were really a bunch of monsters. Stop playing there. Come and help me. Alice, who was standing in front of the stone table, was sweating profusely. Lucia replied with an "Oh," and quickly walked over. His extremely strong vitality of 34 points made every inch of Grimm's bones and flesh incomparably tough. Normal weapons would not be able to hurt him at all. Only a special scalpel enchanted with sharpness and armor-piercing could cut through his skin and see the flesh and blood that were as red as fire and filled with copious flame energy. What Alice needed to do now was to cut open every wound on Grimm's body and find the xenogenic rule fragments that were hidden within. Then, she would use a special method to destroy them. Of course, this repair process was too bloody and cruel. It was not something a normal person could endure. Moreover, due to the special nature of Grimm's body, the process did not look like treatment at all, but more like slaughtering a beast. Not only knives, forceps, and shovels were used, but even the saws and axes used by mortals were also used. In the huge, secret room, the sound of knives and axes was endless, and there was also the sound of saws and saws that made one's teeth sore and legs weak. All kinds of strange sounds made one want to cover their ears and not hear them. Grimm had been through a series of battles, and many of his injuries had already reached his lungs and bones, so it was very difficult to treat him. Just like at this moment, Alice even had to cut open Grimm's chest with sharp blade. She used an axe chisel to cut away the hindering ribs, lifted up the flesh, and revealed a strange, lively, pulsating heart underneath. What a strange human heart! Below Grimm's sternum was a piece of dense dark red muscle tissue. In the huge chest cavity, a strange heart the size of a human head was attached to it. Countless dark red blood vessels of varying sizes extended out from the heart, tightly connected to the organs and flesh around it. On the surface of the heart, the solid membrane of flesh and blood was densely covered with countless strange-shaped magic veins. They were broken, twisted, and wriggled, presenting an unbelievable and strange scene. This was no longer an ordinary heart, but a demonized heart. To put it bluntly, it was a heart of law that had been soaked in the power of law. Chapter 1308. However, at this moment, the heart of the rule had been contaminated by the foreign law energy. Visible to the naked eye, the dark red heart that pulsed rhythmically was stained with some gray that could not be wiped away. It was the energy of Severus's curse. If he did not get rid of this strange energy, the law heart that had been disturbed would not be able to continue helping Grimm. Lucia, do you see the gray? Hurry up and cut them off. Don't let them touch your skin, or else you won't be able to withstand the power of the curse. Lucia's hands were trembling. How many times had she woken up from her nightmares, screaming in fear? What left a deep impression on her was the terrifying flaming giant before her death. Its entire body was wreathed in terrifying flames, and it could destroy the heavens and the earth with a wave of its hand. But now, the flame giant was lying in front of her, and she was using a sharp, enchanted knife to cut at his heart. If her hand was slightly slanted and pierced through his heart, would he still be alive? She did not know why, but the moment this thought popped up, it filled her mind with this ridiculous idea and an irrepressible impulse. However, on the other hand, The power of destiny that she had been studying every day was warning her not to do this. In the past, Lucia, who had a clear distinction between love and hate, would not care about the consequences and would do whatever she wanted. But now, after being immersed in the power of destiny for so long, she had unknowingly developed a habit of following the will of destiny and letting destiny decide everything for her. Since destiny had given her a warning, it must have foreseen something bad or unfavorable for her in advance. What could it be? Lucia thought silently, but her hands did not slow down at all. Like a sophisticated surgical machine, she accurately and perfectly cut off pieces of flesh that were tainted by the gray and then got rid of them. This kind of cutting undoubtedly caused great damage to the Heart of the Rule, but it was much better than having the Heart of the Rule in a chaotic state for a long time. Although Grimm was in a coma, his 34 points in vitality allowed him to have an unparalleled recovery rate. The hole left after the flesh was gouged out was healing at a speed visible to the naked eye. The muscle fibers near the wound pulled out countless fine granulation and twisted together. It was as if every strand of flesh and every piece of bone in this body had its own thoughts and consciousness. It made one feel that every high-ranked magus was an out-and-out monster. He was a monster, both physically and mentally. When Lucia finished repairing Alice's body with all her might, she straightened her back and wiped off the cold sweat on her forehead. She had an inexplicable epiphany. The destruction of the arcane kingdom was not the fault of human beings, but the inevitability of the development of civilization. Upgrading one's own civilization when it was not ready would naturally attract the attention and devastation of thousands of predators. This was not something that could be decided by one or two invaders, but the result of multiple civilizations colliding and devouring each other. In her eyes, that flame giant might be ridiculously powerful and insufferably valiant, capable of destroying the heavens and the earth with just a wave of his hand or a kick. But in the eyes of other predators, perhaps it was just a weak scavenger that was not worth paying attention to at all. Therefore, it was simply a cowardly act for her to put the hatred of the destruction of the arcane kingdom on one person, because she did not dare to challenge many powerful beings, nor did she dare to be the enemy of the whole world, so she could only concentrate all her hatred and pain on one enemy. The more thoroughly Lucia understood her heart, the more intense the pain she felt. The courage to be the enemy of the whole world and to challenge all the powerful beings that had invaded the arcane kingdom was not something that she, a little level 2 arcanist and level 1 wizard, could bear. However, whether she had the strength to take revenge was one thing. Whether she dared to let out the roar from the bottom of her heart was another matter. If she did not even have the courage to face the enemy and let out a roar of revenge, then what was the point of her existence and her persistence? Therefore, when the energy of the heterogeneous law in his body was removed one by one, Grimm, who finally got rid of the control of the heterogeneous law, slowly woke up from his coma. However, when he opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was an incredible scene. A young and beautiful girl, whose eyes were burning with the flame of revenge, clenched her fists and screamed at him, "When I'm strong, I'll definitely challenge and defeat you." Then she turned around and ran out of the secret chamber. Grimm had a good memory. He could see very clearly that the other party's clothes, hands, and cheeks were still stained with blood from the surgery, and that the other party's pretty and tender face was also vaguely familiar. Grimm, who was confused, raised his head reluctantly, ignoring his chest that had been cut open and his body that was full of holes. He looked at Alice, who was next to the stone table and was covered with blood, and looked tired. "Don't look at me. I can't control this girl." Even though she was extremely tired, when Alice saw Grimm, who had regained his consciousness, there was still a sweet smile on her face. "You've worked hard. Go and rest. Leave the rest to me." Grimm glanced at Alice with a pained expression and comforted her gently. Indeed, for a high-ranked magus like him, as long as his soul had not been destroyed by the enemy, he had many ways to recover. However, with his current rank as a magus and the serious injuries he had suffered, This recovery process could take decades or even centuries. Apart from that, high-ranked magi had already excavated the potential of their bodies to the extreme. Healing potions that could heal the dying in the past were not very effective on them. Ordinary injuries could not leave a mark on their bodies, and once they were injured, it meant that the damage was caused by the law that was difficult to completely remove. Now that Grimm had regained consciousness, the follow-up treatment was naturally up to him. This would undoubtedly be an extremely long process that would consume a lot of precious resources. Chip immediately perform a full body scan and formulate a treatment and recovery plan. Beep. Command received. Currently performing a full body scan. Very soon, a three-dimensional projection appeared. The AI chip had marked the most severely damaged parts of the body in dark red and light red. And on the screen at the side, there was a detailed list of the corresponding treatment methods. Seeing the densely packed red regions and the list of resources, Grimm let out a deep sigh. He could only revise the family's medium and long-term development plans, giving himself 100 years to recover. He had no choice. The injuries he had suffered were just too serious. Fortunately, he had won this battle, or else his recovery would have been a long 300 years. Grizzly Hills, Giant Castle. As the territory of the Gaia family that had been passed down for thousands of years, Giant Castle was a famous place in the central continent and even in the entire Magus world. Ever since a certain Magus ancestor had accidentally discovered a well-preserved corpse of a Titan during an expedition to an ancient ruin and successfully extracted a complete bloodline from it, the Gaia family had skyrocketed, becoming the most famous bloodline family in the central continent. Unlike elemental magi, bloodline magi, and especially bloodline families, relied more on the purity and growth of their bloodline. These 2 points were extremely difficult to control. The more potential a bloodline had, the more difficult it was to reproduce. This was a chronic illness that plagued all bloodline families, restricting their further development. Although they had incomparably powerful individual battle strength, they were ultimately unable to grow into a large organization due to their small numbers. Monash, although the Gaia family's individual battle strength was at the top of the central continent, there were only 7 bloodline magi in the entire family. It could be said that there was only one bloodline magus. The slightest disturbance could cause this bloodline family to be severed, and they would lose their bloodline inheritance. In this family, Monash was the most powerful. Gaia undoubtedly had unparalleled absolute authority and was the biggest protective umbrella that supported the Gaia family. But today, the entire giant castle had sunk into a gloomy fog. Because of Monash, Gaia was injured. The patriarch was injured? If such a cold joke were to be said in front of the Gaia people, they would definitely scoff at it and give it a good beating. But today, it had become a bloody reality, causing all the people of Gaia to become anxious and uneasy. In a secret room in Giant Castle, 2 middle-aged magi, a man and a woman, stood in the middle of the secret room, frowning miserably. As for Monash, the Gaia patriarch was half lying on the bed. All right, it's just a small injury. Look at how nervous you all are." Although Monash had returned with injuries, his expression was still calm and composed, as if he didn't care at all. "That's right, after I left the battlefield. How did it turn out?" "My lord, the result is very unexpected." The middle-aged male warlock stepped forward and reported. "After you left, that legendary fire warlock defeated Savorius and forced him to flee the battlefield." "Oh." Monash's expression changed, and he slowly sat up straight. "You mean to the Scarlet One?" "Yes." According to the reports of our informants there, which Clara changed sides at the last moment and chose to help the Crimson family fight against Fred and the others. In the end, they won. All the rank 4 magi fled back to their families, and the troops they left behind on the battlefield became prisoners. Monash, who no longer cared about the details, fell into deep thought. The 2 core members of the Gaia family looked at each other, bowed, and retreated. "The world is about to change." After a long time, Monash Barbarian finally spoke. Gaia let out a sigh. Now that there were no outsiders, he no longer tried to hide it. Without the suppression of the bloodline power, Monash was no longer a threat. 2 or 3 clusters of golden flames appeared on Gaia's sturdy body and burned with a sizzling sound. Damn Grim, why is his law of fire so difficult to deal with? Chapter 1309. Scattered Tower Forest, Magic Cave. This was a secret location deep underground, one of the dozen or so secret strongholds established by the Magus Association in the Central Continent. The entire Magic Cave was a winding underground maze that connected 5 secret residences. There was a large amount of rare materials and resources stored inside. However, at this moment, the place was filled with mournful cries that sounded like the wails of wolves and ghosts. In the largest and most luxurious magic room in the Magic Cave, Savorius, who had turned into a cloud of black smoke, rolled and trembled violently. From time to time, his ugly and distorted face would condense from the black smoke. He would then wail miserably before exploding into black smoke in a burst of golden flames that appeared out of nowhere. Several Tier 3 magi from the Magus Association gathered in a corner of the secret room, discussing the treatment plan for this powerful being in a low voice. However, before they could come to a conclusion, their ears were filled with mournful roars. Bastards! You're all a bunch of bastards. The association used so many resources to nurture you, but you can't even get rid of the law of fire. Tell me, what's the point of having you bastards? Savorius, who had turned back into his human form, lay on the ground and gasped for breath. Scorch marks could be seen all over his body, and he looked miserable and miserable. However, Savorius immediately begged, "Hurry up. Haven't you guys come to a conclusion yet? Hurry up. That bastard's law of fire is about to flare up again." Before he finished speaking, flames burst out from Savorius' emaciated body, and raging flames surged. In the blink of an eye, his body was blown into pieces, and once again dissipated into rolling clouds of black smoke. For law of fire, at least 4 law forces are entangled together. The Tier 3 elemental magi frowned, helpless against the thorny situation before them. Law forces couldn't be eliminated by ordinary potions. They needed a high-grade power of the same level to counteract it. Although there were alchemists, enchanters, alchemists, and summoners present, none of them could do anything about the law power that only Tier 4 magi could touch and control. Finally, Savorius survived the explosion of the law of fire and condensed his body again. He screamed crazily, "I want to leave and return to the Wizard Association. Hurry up and open a portal for me. I have to leave." The wizards of the association glanced at each other and opened a teleportation gate in the middle of the secret room that led to the east of the continent. Savorius almost crawled into it. After the portal slowly disappeared, a middle-aged wizard frowned and said, "Lord Savorius is gone. What about the Central Continent? This time, we have shed all pretense of cordiality with the Crimson family. What if we fall out? Do you think he dares to bring people to fight us?" Another wizard said angrily, "That's hard to say. If they really come knocking on our door, we can't just let the Sorcerer Association's forces in the Central Continent be wiped out by them. I suggest that everyone scatter and hide for now. The entire Central Branch should go into stealth mode." Seconded. Agreed. All right, let's do that. Everyone, split up and get ready. After the wizards finished their discussion, they exploded into thick fog of different colors and disappeared from the secret room. The battle in Crushed Stone Valley had shaken the Central Continent to the point that it was no less than a super earthquake. The appearance of a super powerful being had ignited the passion and glory of the Central Continent's wizards. Countless wizards were spreading the news, and countless wizards were secretly inquiring about it. There were countless versions of the story of the Battle of Crushed Stone Valley. In each version, the brightest star was destined to belong to one person, the greatest legendary wizard that had just been born in the Central Continent, Grim. Grim was only a mid-grade 4 fire wizard, and he would need a long time to reach the peak of grade 4. However, This did not stop the people from enthusiastically pushing him to the throne of the Central Continent's top wizard. A super powerful being. Central Continent. This was the first time these two terms were so closely linked. Only the Central Continent's magi, who had been discriminated against and looked down on, could fully understand what it represented. From now on, the Central Continent would no longer be a barren land of talented magi, nor would it be a pile of loose sand. It would become the fourth largest organization that could rival the three great Magus organizations. Apart from the large and medium-sized Magus families, almost all of the Central Continent's magi welcomed and looked forward to this. Amidst the huge expectations and cheers of the people, the Crimson family's reputation and influence rose like a boat rising with the tide. In an instant, all voices of opposition were suppressed, and they became the most powerful family in the Central Continent. After the end of the Great Battle, the situation in the Central Continent became clearer. There were many independent magi waving flags and shouting for the Crimson family, and the voices calling for unity could be heard. However, in the Central Continent, the ones who could truly decide the future of the scattered forest of towers were the dozen or so rank 4 organizations. In the past, a rank 4 Magus was already an unshakable force. No matter how chaotic the outside world was, the dozen or so rank 4 organizations could still maintain order and dignity in their territories. No ambitious person would casually offend the territory of these Tier 4 organizations and do something that would harm their interests. But now, the Crimson family's momentum was unparalleled, and the voices calling for them to unite were earth-shattering. Grimm, who everyone was looking forward to, had gathered a powerful force that could overturn the structure of the scattered forest of towers. Under such circumstances, even the rank 4 organizations that had experienced countless trials and tribulations began to feel uneasy. The scattered forest of towers was about to change. After the battle at Crushed Stone Canyon, Monash Gaia, the head of the Golden Clan, had retreated to his family's headquarters. Gaia had retreated to the family's headquarters and remained hidden. It was said that he was recuperating from his injuries. The Randner family, who was originally the Crimson family's greatest opponent, had actually become the reason for the Crimson family's complete victory. Hence, the higher-ups of the Crimson family and the Randner family oversaw Crushed Stone Canyon and began to clean up the battlefield. On the other hand, Fred and the others, who had suffered a great defeat in the battle, fled back to their family's territory and began to recruit troops. The 4 of them issued a joint statement, declaring that they would not accept the Crimson family's tyrannical rule and that they would fight the Crimson family to the death. However, although they issued the statement, they did not take any action. Instead, they secretly contacted the other rank 4 magi who had yet to participate in the battle, hoping to pull them into their camp. Although Fred and the others had lost the battle in Crushed Stone Canyon, the legendary fire shaman Grimm had also suffered heavy injuries after fighting Monash and Savorius. Fred and the others secretly spread the news that due to Grimm's injuries, his strength had fallen below rank 4, and it would be difficult for him to fight again in the next several hundred years. Hence, Fred and the others clamored that as long as all the rank 4 magi of the Central Continent worked together, they would be able to expel Grimm from the scattered towers. This way, the Central Continent would be able to settle down again, and everyone would be able to maintain their previous authority and status. This kind of propaganda would undoubtedly move the rank 4 magi. After all, it was far better to control a clan and rule over a territory than to lower one's dignity and serve a powerhouse. The only thing that everyone was worried about was Grimm's injuries. If Grimm's injury was not as serious as what Fred and the others said, they would be putting their family's foundation under the blade of a super expert if they showed up at this time. It was because of this concern that they were in a dilemma. Right at this moment, a piece of shocking news arrived, and it finally caused everyone to be unable to maintain their calm and composure any longer. The legendary fire shaman Grimm had appeared once again. The September sun was bright and gentle. As it shone on everyone, they could feel a sense of warmth from the bottom of their hearts. The giant floating ship, Viscero, slowly traversed the sky. At the bow of the ship, Grim was wearing a thick red robe, facing the bone-chilling wind that blew in his face. The berserk healing of the scraping bones to cure poison had severely damaged his body, causing his vitality to drop from 34 points to 18 points. However, his spiritual force had turned out to be a blessing in disguise, rising by 2 points to 46 points. Overall, Grim's battle prowess had been severely affected, and it would be difficult for him to return to his peak state in a short period of time. However, the outside world naturally did not know about his true condition. Just by showing his face once again, he had already deeply shocked those fellows with ulterior motives. An injured powerhouse was still a powerhouse. No Tier 4 sorcerer dared to provoke the Tai Sui before they had a clear understanding of his true strength. They did not dare to challenge the might of a super expert. It's been a long time since a powerhouse has appeared in the central continent. Sorceress Clara, who was standing beside Grim, sighed and said, "I remember that 800 years ago, Wizard Cerubo was also in the limelight for a period of time. Unfortunately, due to the power of the three great factions, he did not dare to touch the old structure of the scattered towers. He could only be a passerby, quickly advancing to rank 5 and heading to the outer regions." Hearing her sigh and hinting, Grim tightened his robe and smiled. "I'm not in a hurry. I'm at least 400 to 500 years away from advancing to rank 5. In this period of time, it's enough for me to do a lot of things." Standing on the other side of Grim was the rank 4 body refinement Magus Fabris, who had been captured on the battlefield. There were no restraints or shackles on his body, but from his dejected look, it was obvious that he had lost the capital and confidence to continue fighting against the Crimson family. "When are you going to let me go?" Fabris said dejectedly. "After going through so many twists and turns, my family must be in a mess. If I don't go back soon, I can't guarantee that they won't do anything dangerous." Hearing Fabris' weak threat, Grim smiled indifferently. "If you want to go back, you can leave at any time. On this point, you will always be free." Fabris hesitated for a moment, then turned around and walked towards the side of the huge ship. When he reached the side of the ship, he finally stopped. Without turning back, he said dejectedly, "Don't worry, Fabris, will never go against you again. In the future, the Fabris family will follow the lead of the Crimson family. I only hope that you will allow me to keep the legacy of my family." Grim's voice came from afar. "Deal." Chapter 13:10. Seeing Fabris' figure disappear into the horizon, Clara slowly retracted her gaze. After hesitating for a while, she finally asked softly, "Lord Grim, since you already have the power and prestige to unite the scattered towers, what do you have in mind for the future structure of the organization?" Why did she have to ask such a question? To be honest, there were countless people in the central continent who wanted to know the answer. The Crimson was rising, and Grim had risen to the top. How did this legendary fire wizard plan to unite the scattered towers? How was he going to unify the sorcerer families that were in disarray? This was something that every magus in the central continent wanted to know. If Grim wanted to monopolize the Crimson family and let them dominate the entire scattered tower forest, the Crimson family might be able to expand quickly in a short period of time. But from a deeper perspective, it did not meet the expectations of the vast number of low-level wizards. In the past thousands of years, the central continent had been ruled by scattered wizard families. The large and small wizard families were intertwined, controlling more than 90% of the wizard resources. Once those independent wizards and wandering wizards lost the support of their families, it would be difficult for them to even maintain their own survival. On the other hand, many sorcerer families focused on bloodlines. Those who could enter their core were almost all direct descendants of the family members. Even if one had extraordinary talent and great potential, they would still have to submit to the core wizards of the family. So in the central continent, if a lone independent wizard wanted to make a name for himself, it would be much more difficult than the Wizard Association. As for the north, it was the world of witches, and it was also extremely xenophobic. The Silver Alliance was the world of arcane wizards, and wizards of other lineages were also suppressed there. So, Looking at the entire wizard world, the Wizard Association was the best place to develop wizards. The Northern Witches used a witch council system. The entire northern region was divided among the 13 witch factions to rule and manage. Only public affairs were handled by the leaders of the witch factions, who formed a witch council to discuss and deal with them. It was difficult for other wizard organizations to learn this governing structure. This was because the main reason why the Northern Witches could unite was that they had a cohesive core, and that was the Witch King, Salem. She was one of the 3 great magi in the sorcerer world. She was also known as the Witch Queen, and the Ancient Witch. The ruling structure of the Silver Alliance was also a parliamentary system. However, in the Silver Alliance's territory, the arcane sorcerers were the most powerful, and the other branches of the sorcerers were greatly suppressed, making it difficult for them to enter the core management. Therefore, if Grimm did not plan to adopt the model of a large Magus family, the only one he could think of was the ruling style of the Magus Association. After hearing Witch Clara's question, not to mention Mary, even Merrill, Amelia, and the other higher-ups of the Crimson Church couldn't help but perk up their ears. They wanted to hear how their family head would consider and make a decision. This was a matter that concerned every single one of them, so they had no choice but to care about it. Grimm stood ramrod straight at the bow of the ship, his eyes gazing at the sea of clouds in the distance. A relaxed expression appeared on his face, and he said indifferently, "I don't plan to adopt the ruling structure of the Magus Association." Witch Clara's expression darkened, and she looked a little disappointed. Behind her, Merrill, Amelia, and the other girls showed joy in their eyes. Only Mary's expression did not change. Her gaze fell on Grimm, and she could not hide the worry in her eyes. Grimm sighed leisurely. "Of course, I don't plan to go back to the old ways of the Magus family." The girls were all stunned. Witch Clara's face showed a thoughtful look, but her eyes quietly lit up with 2 rays of hope. Actually, the best way to unite people and gather power in the Central Continent has already appeared. It's just that it's still in its infancy, and it hasn't been developed yet. Grimm continued. You mean Horton Witchcraft Academy?" Witch Clara's eyes suddenly lit up. "That's right." Grimm nodded. "The Magus families place too much emphasis on bloodlines, and it's difficult for them to accept new magi with outstanding talents. That's why we weaken the ruling power of the Magus families and promote witchcraft academies that focus on knowledge and power. This is the best plan I can come up with. This might cause the dissatisfaction of all the high-ranked magi." Witch Clara sighed. After all, the Magus families led by high-ranked magi have lived like princes in the Central Continent for far too long. If the witchcraft academies want to develop, I'm afraid they'll be boycotted by all the large and medium-sized Magus families. But this is of great benefit to the Central Continent, isn't it? If not, there wouldn't be so many independent magi waving flags and cheering for the Crimson family. However, the ones who decide the future of the Central Continent aren't those powerless independent magi, but the high-ranked magi who have extreme power. That's why we need to overcome all obstacles and forge ahead. Moreover, the enemy isn't a monolithic block, and we can use methods to break them down. At the very least, your Count Ranner family should be on our side, right?" Grimm asked half-jokingly. Hearing Grimm's question, Witch Clara's expression changed a few times, and she finally nodded with difficulty. "Of course, from the moment our 2 families reached an agreement, our Count Ranner family can only walk this path to the end. I can express my support for the Horton Witchcraft Academy and transfer most of the family's power there." Grimm nodded happily upon hearing this. "That's enough. With the power of Fabra's family, we're not alone here. We can also fight for the powers like Molten Fire City and Silent Hill that didn't appear on the battlefield. So, we'll change the battle to a civil one, and it'll depend on which side can rope in more support." They're just a bunch of defeated dogs. What qualifications do they have to compete with us? As long as we have a powerful being like you, I think the observers who have yet to express their stance will know what to choose. But at this point, Clara couldn't help but show a trace of worry. This time, The Magus Association has chosen to directly intervene, and it's obvious that they don't intend to let the Central region unify itself. Will they send more Magi to interfere in the Central region's affairs? Since the Magus Association has chosen to become enemies with the Central region, we need to pull in some external allies. The Silver Alliance and the Northern Witches can't just sit and watch as the Magus Association invades the Central region. They might be happy to see the Central region and the Magus Association suffer losses on both sides. But once I'm defeated, the Central region will become the Magus Association's territory. Will they be able to tolerate that? So what's our next step? Intimidate a group, rope in a group, attack a group. Grimm said decisively. Let's take the initiative to fight against Freed and Milva. We might as well fight fiercely, and at the same time, intimidate Nicholas and Matthew. If they dare to make any moves, there will be no place for them in the Central region in the future. As for Freed, I'll personally contact him. The women behind Grimm heard this and couldn't help but straighten their backs. Pass down my orders. Gather the Crimson Army and prepare to attack Fort Cothran. Yes. Fort Cothran, the headquarters of the Tower Forest Association. This was the territory of Freed's Yomo family. More than a month had passed since the Battle of Crushed Stone Valley, but there were more and more rumors about the Central Continent, making it harder for people to distinguish the truth from the lies. However, the tense atmosphere around Fort Cothran was real. One after another, sorcerer troops were transferred from various secondary planes back to the headquarters and filled in the military fortresses around Fort Cothran. A large number of messengers were shuttling back and forth, constantly passing on all kinds of news. The news about the Crimson family's movements was undoubtedly the most attractive. When the participants of the Battle of Crushed Stone Valley returned to their respective forces and spread the news that they were heavily injured, Fort Cothran was once jubilant and excited. However, with the news of Grimm's reappearance, the place once again became deathly silent and oppressive. This was especially so when news of the Crimson family gathering their troops on a large scale and preparing to travel a long distance to invade Fort Cothran. The entire Yomo family was in a panic. What made them even more afraid was that the terrifying legendary fire Magus, Grimm, had come along with the Crimson Army. Once this news spread, half of the Yomo family's subsidiary forces immediately ran away. The rest were in a state of panic and were in a state of turmoil. In order to intimidate these opportunists who were sitting on the fence, Freed could only personally order all the Magi stationed in the secondary planes to be mobilized, as well as a large number of Magi stationed there to strengthen the family headquarters defense. As for whether this would cause unrest in the secondary planes, or whether it would cause the Yomo family to lose control of the secondary planes, this was not something they could consider now. According to the reports of the Yomo family spies, the Crimson family had sent out 7 giant floating ships to invade Fort Cothran. All the Crimson troops were hidden in the giant floating ships, so it was difficult to know the scale of the enemy's invasion. Unlike other Magus families, the Crimson family had a large number of battle magic equipment and weapons of war. This was something that everyone knew. Their most famous magical war equipment were the powerful magical golem dragons and the giant floating airships that could be used as motherships. Now, the enemy had sent out 7 of the family's 10 existing giant floating ships, which clearly showed the importance and attitude they took this invasion seriously. Chapter 1311. From the Alovis region, where the Crimson family's headquarters was located, to Cothran Castle, they had to cross 4 regions, a total of 13,000 miles. If they were to travel on the ground without any rest, it would probably take more than a month to reach the final destination, Cothran Castle. This was not even taking into account the various attacks and battles along the way. Otherwise, it would take even longer. These 4 regions belonged to 1 large, 7 medium, and 23 small wizard clans. Among them, the large wizard family was the Intim family that the Tier 4 wizard Nicholas belonged to. Due to Nicholas, the Intim family and the Crimson family were in a hostile state. Hence, when the Crimson family's floating airships slowly appeared from the horizon, All the wizard families along the way held their breaths and closed their doors, not daring to come out and bring disaster to their families. Especially the Enum family, they were extremely nervous. All the core members of the family had returned to Oak City, guarding the wizard's pagoda, not daring to step out. When the floating airships passed by less than 200 miles away from Oak City, the Enum family did not even dare to launch a sneak attack. They were afraid that the Crimson family's aerial forces would change their target in a fit of rage and encircle their Oak City again. The Crimson family's aerial forces did not just consist of 7 floating airships. They relied on the floating airships to form a massive floating platform. The outermost layer was, of course, the cheap and simple eyeball airships. Hundreds and thousands of them wandered around 10 miles away from the aerial forces, searching for any creatures or traps that could threaten the fleet. Those who approached the fleet without warning would be killed by the terrifying scorching rays. Inside the eyeball fighter, there were oddly shaped magic aircrafts with goblin pilots inside. They were usually the size of a horse carriage, and the magic weapons they were equipped with were of a higher level. Wild Charlie Type 2 Rapid Fire Cannon, 773 Enhanced Magic Ray Gun, Gabulon Type 3 Magic Missile, Super Magic Modified Full Cover Magic Shield, Latte Style Multi-Frequency Protective Goggles, Magic Combustion Set Energy Module, Triggered Arcane and Magic Shield. It had to be said that after hundreds of years and tens of generations of goblin engineers, the magical weapons that the Crimson family's goblins were equipped with were much more advanced and powerful than before. In particular, the offensive power of the magical weapons and the safety protection of the goblin mechanics had reached the peak of perfection. With the Molten Fire City's endless supply of Karas alloy, there would be a large number of magic furnaces. The problem of energy shortage that had been plaguing the Devil Mechanical Army for a long time was solved. The current demonic mechanical army was no longer the same as before, and its combat power had risen by several levels. It had risen from the cannon fodder of the Crimson family's subsidiary forces to the family's elite force. However, the continuous mining for hundreds of years had caused the metal resources in the Goblin dimension to drop to an extremely dangerous level. In order to obtain more and better magical metals, the Crimson family had no choice but to search for similar planes of resources to ensure the continuity of the family's magical machinery. On the stone platform at the highest level of the Oak City Wizard's Pagoda, Nicholas held onto his wizard staff, observing the massive flying fleet that streaked across the distant horizon. Even though the other party was not within his field of vision, he could still sense the powerful aura coming from the powerful mental energy of a level 4 wizard. Nicholas could sense an extremely familiar, yet terrifying wizard aura from the giant metal warship in the middle of the fleet. Grim was really in the flying fleet. Nicholas held onto his wizard staff tightly. Due to the excessive force, the joints of his skinny left hand were exposed, and his veins were bulging. His expression was extremely ugly. The people surrounding him were all level 3 wizards of the Enum family. They stared at Nicholas anxiously with solemn expressions, afraid that the patriarch of the family would do something terrifying in his rage. Among the crowd, a brawny man in golden armor with a giant axe on his back stepped forward and said loudly, "Leader, why don't I lead the White Ghost Army and charge forward? This will save those gossips from mocking our Enum family for not even having the courage to fight. Iron Tiger, you can't drag the whole family into this just because of your personal feelings." A middle-aged wizard with a stern expression stood up and scolded angrily. "The other party is too powerful. If we send people to ambush them, it's very likely that the enemy's main target will be Oak City. Once they give up on Cothran Castle and choose to attack Oak City first." At this point, the middle-aged wizard's words were cut off. Even though he did not continue, the meaning of his words was clear. Oak City, under the rule of the Enum family, would never be able to withstand the attack of the Magic Machinery Army, especially when the other party had tough opponents like Bug Lich Bliss, Red Dragon Witch Meryl, Demonic Woman Amelia, and Blood Knight Soros. The Enum family's chances of winning were even lower. Yet, the other party had given up on the Enum family, choosing to travel a long distance to attack Cothran Castle. On one hand, it was because Fred was the leader of the resistance, but on the other hand, he looked down on the power of the Enum family. The Crimson family had only left 3 giant floating ships and a newly created magic machinery puppet dragon in the Lovis area. But this kind of defensive power was enough to repel all the ambitious people with ill intentions. Iron Tiger looked at the unhappy middle-aged wizard and coldly said, "Do you think the Crimson family won't send people to attack us if we lay down our flags and lay low and be obedient? You bunch of cowards, since you want to fight them, you can't take any chances. Take advantage of the fact that they have no time to care about other things on the long journey. Take advantage of the fact that they can't stay for long to ambush them and hide in the wizard's pagoda. They can't possibly stay here and waste time with us, right?" Another sorcerer, who was slightly older and had an equally solemn expression, could not help but say angrily, "We are all cowards, and you are the only hero, right? If you have the ability, lead a team to ambush the nest of the Crimson family now. Look at the difference in power between the little bit of power we have accumulated over hundreds of years in them." Immediately, a few more sorcerers joined the quarrel, and the platform was in an uproar with no end in sight. The argument of his subordinates immediately made Nicholas' face turn green. He suddenly shook the wizard's staff in his hand. An invisible ripple of energy spread out, pushing all the wizards back a few steps. "All of you shut up." Nicholas turned around to look at the crowd, his expression cold and furious. He said in a hoarse voice, "The enemy hasn't even attacked us, and you almost started fighting yourselves." "Oomph, leader." The muscular man took a step forward, as if he wanted to say something, but his words were interrupted by Nicholas. "All right, that's enough. The enemy's target isn't us. There's no need for us to take the initiative." Nicholas' face was dark as he said, "Let's see how their battle with Fred is before deciding what we should do next. Before that, all of you better stay in the wizard's pagoda and don't cause any unmanageable trouble. Do you hear me?" "Yes." The rest of the wizards bowed in unison, their faces filled with joy. The muscular man let out a muffled grunt, but he could only bow and accept the order. After suppressing the argument within the family, Nicholas once again turned to look at the Crimson Fleet in the distance. He could not help but mutter, "The world is going to change. The scattered forest of towers is really going to change." Cothran Castle, within the wizard's secret room. The magic mirror flashed a few times and finally revealed an image in the distance. Fred looked at the slowly appearing wizard's illusory figure with a serious expression. He hurriedly bowed and said, "Sir Onake, you have to help me this time." A moment later, the illusory figure in the magic mirror completely stabilized. A young and bewitching man with a cold expression appeared. He yawned and glanced at Fred. He said coldly, "You know that my time is precious. Don't waste it. Speak quickly if you have anything to say. My lord, my family is in trouble. If you don't lend a helping hand, we may never see each other again." Although Fred was usually sanctimonious, in front of this lord, he was as obedient and docile as a sorcerer's acolyte. "Oh, aren't you doing quite well in the center of the continent? How did it end up like this?" The young man was slightly stunned. Could it be that the Wizard Association has launched a large-scale invasion? It's not the Wizard Association. I'm still thinking about that wizard experiment of mine. If you don't want to talk about it, then don't." The young man said with a cold expression, "Sir, I'll talk. It's not the Wizard Association. The ones who invaded my family are a newly risen wizard family in the center of the continent. Their leader is a fire wizard. Even though he hasn't reached the peak of level 4, he already has the abilities of a powerful fighter." Fred hurriedly told the truth. Center of the continent. Fire wizard. The young man rubbed his chin and fell in a deep thought. He felt an inexplicable sense of familiarity when he connected these words together. Suddenly, he raised his head and shouted, "Don't tell me the fire wizard you're talking about is called Grim?" This time, it was Fred's turn to be shocked. He never thought that even a level 6 great wizard from the center of the continent, Onake, would know Grim's name. Chapter 1312. The Vassalo. In a luxurious secret room on the second level of the ship, Grimm sat at a desk in the corner of the room, reading the Book of Filthy Darkness with the help of a small illumination crystal. The Book of Filthy Darkness was indeed Grimm's sole equipment. After devouring the Book of Wisdom, it had gained an incomparably strange intelligence attribute. Grimm would now flip through the Book of Filthy Darkness every day, reading and memorizing the contents within. Every time he flipped through it, the contents on the pages would be different. Most of the time, it was just one or two sentences without any rhyme or reason. Sometimes there would even be strange runes and strange incantations. After the A.I. chip's analysis, Grimm deduced that these were fragments of high-grade knowledge. These fragments of knowledge were all fragmented, and some are even inverted. Their order was chaotic, and there were even some special knowledge from other planes mixed within. For a regular magus to decipher the truly useful contents was like finding a needle in a haystack. The difficulty was obvious. However, Grimm had the help of the A.I. chip, so he did not need to slowly decipher and analyze this messy knowledge. All he had to do was forcefully memorize it and store it in the A.I. chip's database. As for the subsequent sorting and analysis, it was all done by the A.I. chip. Hence, this Book of Filthy Darkness that was like a book of hypnosis was still able to reap some benefits after a long period of perseverance. Such a terrifying reading experience was also a form of training for his spiritual force. Hence, for a long time after obtaining the Book of Filthy Darkness, Grimm did three things every day: meditation, reading, and experimenting with magic spells. Many times, eating, sleeping, and entertainment were essential activities for regular humans, but high-ranked magi could do without them. They could even go for months without eating, drinking, or sleeping, busying themselves with their mysterious and profound magic experiments. Only when their spiritual force could no longer support it would they take a short break to recover from the fatigue accumulated in their bodies. Many high-ranked magi had even changed their own energy cycle, using high-purity energy crystals to replace the cumbersome and primitive eating and digestive systems. To them, all the pleasures and happiness in the world were so insignificant that they could even be directly ignored. The grandeur of a worldly emperor who could behead thousands of people with a single word. The splendid and extravagant banquets, the lingering aftertaste of fine wine, the bold and unconstrained beautiful noble women who gently fanned themselves, the shy young girls who were as pure and cute as deer, the peerless treasures that came from every corner of the world, and the flattery and admiration of the nobles who were full of flattery. To them, nothing was more delightful than the tiny improvements in their own witchcraft experiments. The trajectory of their lives had already deviated from the cognitive range and height of ordinary people. They had become a group of ascetic practitioners who had a clear understanding of the world and pursued knowledge and truth. If the middle-rank and low-rank sorcerers were just a bunch of little moles struggling in the plane world, the high-rank sorcerers had tasted the diversity of different planes, witnessed the treacherous and gorgeous outer space, and experienced the storms in the endless sea of stars. Their perspective and level of view on life, the world, and power had already surpassed the limits of the plane. They could almost be regarded as a different kind of life form from the middle-rank and low-rank sorcerers. An ant would be overjoyed that it had found a drop of honey, but at this moment, the lion had already climbed to the top of the high cliff and let out a proud roar at this world, at the millions of weak lives that lived in it. Different life forms, power, and patterns of life formed different lives. Even if an ant was placed in the position of a lion, would its weak eyesight be able to see the herd of deer galloping more than 10 miles away? Would its tiny strength be able to withstand the fierce wind blowing towards it? In the face of everything in front of it, would it be scared to death, or would it feel like the earth was under its control? All of this was unknown, but at the same time, it was known. Grimm's current achievements were partly due to the advantage of having a mind that could transcend souls, as well as the powerful assistance of the chip. However, in the end, most of the credit was due to Grimm's strict self-discipline and strong sense of danger. If it was anyone else, they would have long since been unable to suppress the restlessness and thirst in their hearts. They would have wanted to enjoy the feeling of being in power to their heart's content, and even more so, they would have wanted to taste the various beauties that would prostrate themselves before them. A rank 4 magus was already the peak of power in the plane. If they did not enjoy it now, when would they? Moreover, with the dazzling titles of a rank 4 magus, a powerful being, and a legendary magus, even the most beautiful girls or magi would bend over to flatter you and be obedient to you. Without a strong heart and a strong will, who could resist the temptation of 1,000 charms? However, Grimm had done it. There was a small porthole on the side of the ship, just above the desk. It was now deep into the night, and the huge moon hanging high in the sky emitted a bright silver moonlight that shone on Grimm's body through the porthole. For some reason, the moonlight today was a little hazy with a trace of charm. Grimm raised his head to look at the bright moon and vaguely felt the aura of a law fluctuation. Before he could react, the scenery and colors in front of him suddenly darkened. Light and shadows flickered in the cabin, and a colorful fog filled the air. 2 coquettish beauties dressed in soft chiffon appeared out of thin air and began to sing and dance. Shortly after, a beautiful and mysterious woman walked out from the depths of the fog, slowly appearing in front of Grimm. Her face was covered with a thin veil, concealing her beautiful and coquettish appearance, only revealing a pair of deep blue eyes. A transparent, rhombus-shaped crystal was embedded in her forehead, flickering with a dark and mysterious luster. Her body was overflowing with the strange fluctuations of the laws that were hard to forget for a long time. She was a magus, a rank 4 magus who had grasped the power of a powerful law. How did she sneak into the Viscero? Grimm was slightly puzzled, and he could not help but secretly look around. Sure enough, in the entire scene, only the 3 mysterious witches and himself were left. Everything else was rapidly fading away and disappearing. The floor, the wooden table, the walls of the cabin, the large bed, the 2 pots of green plants in the corner. Everything became hazy and then exploded into colorful smoke, causing the entire space to become even more hazy and illusory. Grimm tried to call out to the chip, but there was no response. He immediately realized that this was no longer the original material world, and his spiritual consciousness had been dragged into a special spiritual illusion by the other party using some kind of method. The most suspicious thing was, of course, the strange law ripples that were constantly vibrating within his body. You must be Grimm. Sure enough, you're not afraid of death. You've already suffered such a serious injury, yet you still dare to run around. The beautiful witch's cherry lips opened slightly. Her appearance looked gentle, but the words that came out of her mouth were exceptionally frightening. Aren't you afraid that you'll die halfway? Grimm scanned his surroundings and tried to use his power a few times, but he could not even ignite a small flame. It was as if this space had been completely controlled by the enemy, and there was not even a trace of fire energy left. However, the law of fire was not affected by space-time and illusions. It gathered around Grimm, forming a 4-color defensive spell. Seeing the flames that suddenly appeared around Grimm, the beautiful magus chuckled. I was wondering why you were so daring. So it's because you're relying on the power of laws. Immediately after, her beautiful eyes swept over Grimm's body, and she could not help but exclaim in admiration. A young magus who has advanced for less than 200 years is actually able to push the power of laws to such a level. Truly admirable. However, if this is all you have, I'm afraid it'll be difficult for you to walk out of this dream alive. Dream? Grimm was slightly startled. In all honesty, he had always thought that the other party had used some sort of method to pull his consciousness into some sort of illusion. However, from the other party's words, this did not seem to be an illusion, but a dream. Didn't that mean that he was in a dream in reality? Grimm smiled and took a step forward. He stretched out his hands and began to summon his equipment. In the next second, a bright light burst out, and the Book of Darkness appeared in his left hand, emitting a deep black light. However, his right hand was still empty, and there was no sign of the flaming coral wizard's staff. It seemed that this dream had isolated all of his spiritual connections with the outside world. Apart from the Book of Darkness, which was his own sole equipment, the rest of his equipment and weapons did not realize that there was something wrong with them, so they could not be materialized. Soul equipment? The beautiful Magus was stunned again. I didn't expect you to have such a high-grade soul equipment other than the power of laws. All right, then let's have a serious fight in this dream. After saying this, the beautiful Magus took a step back, and colorful fog suddenly surged around her, completely covering her body. At the same time, the two beautiful girls who were singing and dancing slowly approached Grim, giggling. Inexplicably, a bone-chilling murderous intent spread out from the depths of his soul. In reality, Grim was still sitting by the wooden table, his hands holding the non-existent Book of Darkness. His eyes were dull and unfocused, and he was snoring softly from his nostrils. The bright moon in the sky was still as beautiful as ever. Chapter 13:13 Northland, Tower of Destiny. Today was the day when the Witches of Destiny gathered together for their ritual. From noon to midnight, the top floor of the tower was shining brightly, illuminating the entire Dragonbone Waste. The astrology hall was filled with light and shadows, turning into a sea of light. Lucia was sitting on the astrology platform, feeling bored. She was poking at the mirage floating around her like soap bubbles. Inside each soap bubble, there was a strange scene in a certain part of the plane world flashing silently. Those who could be captured and projected by the Tower of Destiny would not be nameless. Almost all the people who appeared in the scene were terrifying existences that could shake the world with a stomp of their feet. Naturally, one of them was the legendary Wizard Grim, who stood above everyone else in the central region. What's wrong with this guy? He can even fall asleep while reading. Lucia grabbed a fate projection wrapped in a transparent light film in her hand and slowly adjusted the angle and direction to peep at the lazy, sleeping wizard. No, he doesn't look like he's sleeping, but more like, Lucia muttered to herself. Suddenly, she heard a deep and beautiful female voice. Dream kill. It's a dream kill. Looks like Ivana can't wait anymore. Lucia turned her head to look at Alice, who was standing beside her. She was wearing a beautiful starry robe, and her face and exposed skin were overflowing with a sparkling brilliance. Lucia couldn't help but ask in surprise, "Teacher, your lover has been hit by the enemy's dream killer. Aren't you afraid?" A sweet smile appeared on Alice's jade-like face. She said calmly, "If Grim could be killed so easily, he would have died a long time ago. I'm afraid Ivana, who is always patient and never makes a move unless she's confident, is going to suffer a great loss this time." Why are you so confident in Grim?" Lucia asked in surprise. "You've learned many ways to use the power of fate. Can't you see Grim's fate? Do you think he's going to die today?" Alice asked with a smile. Lucia was speechless. After all, she still considered herself an arcana master. Although she had obtained the rank 1 destiny profession, she was still used to using the meticulousness and knowledge of an arcanist to investigate her surroundings most of the time. It was hard, therefore, for Alice, who was so ready to place all her hopes on the providence and trust of her life. Perhaps this was the main reason why Alice could become the lamplighter of fate, while she could only play a few simple spells of fate. Silver Alliance, Sky City. In front of a small mushroom hut in the dark swamp, an ugly witch with a hunched back and messy hair raised her head with great difficulty, silently looking at the starry night sky. Behind her, a dim orange candlelight shone from the low hut, casting a faint yellow halo around her body. In the dark night sky, the 12 main stars were moving side by side, following their own trajectories and paths to illuminate different star regions. Each star region was also dotted with stars, sometimes bright and sometimes dim, giving people a strange feeling of unpredictability. The night sky was especially strange tonight. The stars were changing more violently and abruptly. Some of the stars would suddenly become abnormally bright, even having the tendency to overshadow the 12 main stars. Some would suddenly become dim, and their figures could no longer be found. If it were not for the faint starlight, people would have thought that it had died silently. Leona was looking at a star region in the southeast corner of the night sky. Under her gaze, an auxiliary star in that star domain suddenly became abnormally bright, almost illuminating half of the starry sky. While it was bright, it also seemed to be burning. A layer of dark red halo lingered around it, almost completely igniting it. Seeing this, Leona could not help but open her mouth wide, revealing a mouth full of yellow and broken teeth, and laugh coldly. Ivana, I've waited for you for 500 years. I can't believe you finally walked out of the land of fog. If you hid in the land of fog, I might not have been able to do anything to you. Now that you've come out, and even dared to fight with an opponent of the same level. Kikik, don't tell me you think I've forgotten what happened 500 years ago. Today, I'll return the humiliation and hatred you've brought me. With that, Leona hurriedly rushed back to the mushroom hut. After a series of clanking noises, she rummaged through a broken wooden chest covered in dust and found a strange wooden sculpture. The sculpture was only the size of a palm, and the wood was old and yellow, with many cracks on it. From its appearance, the sculpture seemed to be that of a beautiful and graceful woman, with exquisite eyebrows and smooth lines. It was somewhat similar to the terrifying which that appeared in Grimm's dream. Without hesitation, Leona threw the sculpture into the huge and ugly crucible in the corner of the hut. The crucible spun once before sinking into the pot of green soup. The moment the sculpture came into contact with the poisonous soup that had been simmered for hundreds of years, a shrill and angry scream came from the void in the distance. What a beautiful scream! What a nostalgic voice! Ivana, I'll return the hatred you've inflicted on me tenfold, 100-fold. Kikik! Leona let out a mournful and cold laugh like an owl as she continuously condensed dark green runes that were filled with mournful wails and terrifying ghostly howls, and threw them into the crucible one by one. The flames below the crucible burned even more fiercely, and the flames that licked the body of the crucible had a ghastly green luster. The shrill scream in the void grew louder and louder. Despair. Scream. Suffer. Ivana, this is your retribution. As if the despair spell was not enough, Leona brought a small stool over and picked up the largest bottle from the pile hanging on the roof beam. Then, she opened the cork and poured the dirty liquid inside along with a huge eyeball into the crucible. As soon as the eyeball entered the pot, it instantly turned into an abnormally huge eyeball monster, tightly entangling the sculpture. The woman on the sculpture seemed to come to life as she raised her head and screamed in extreme pain, then sank into the bottom of the pot with the eyeball monster. The crucible immediately began to tremble violently, and the viscous green soup inside began to boil, as if there were two abnormally powerful monsters frantically fighting inside. How is it, Ivana? This is the feast of despair that I've been brewing for you for hundreds of years, and that eye of despair. You must be enjoying it. Then, I'll give you something even more ruthless. After saying that, Leona no longer hesitated. She grabbed and tossed bottles and jars into her hands one after another. Then, she threw the specially refined Eye of Despair into the crucible one by one. These Eye of Despair may not have any other effects, but they were the most terrifying beasts of pollution. They could inject a spiritual element called despair into the target's body through physical attacks. Moreover, this kind of attack could not be immune to magic resistance. However, just as Leona was crazily dancing around the crucible, an extremely angry and terrifying female voice suddenly rang out in the mushroom hut. Leona, you're courting death. The next moment, the sharp female voice suddenly turned into a terrifying scream, instantly setting off a terrible sound wave storm in the hut. The high-frequency vibration of the sound wave had extreme destructive power, instantly destroying everything that was not protected by the spell formation. The mushroom hut fell apart in the terrifying sound wave. Everything, including the bacteria, wooden pillars, iron hooks, square tables, books, bottles, and countless unknown things, were shattered in the sound wave, then disintegrated into tiny particles that were difficult to see with the naked eye and were swept away. Even the almost crazy Leona felt like she was struck by lightning in the terrifying scream, and purplish-black snakes of blood flowed out of her eyes, ears, mouth, and nose. The skin all over his body cracked inch by inch, revealing the withered muscles, bones, and flesh underneath. 500 years ago, Leona might have been a powerful witch of despair. But now, due to the serious injuries on her body, her strength had fallen to the high level 2, and she no longer had the power she once had. As a level 2 witch, she cursed a level 4 false witch who was in her prime, and a terrifying false witch leader at that. Almost dying on the spot after suffering a long-distance counterattack was already considered a light punishment. If Ivana had not been using the dream-killing technique to fight with Grimm, this counterattack would have been enough to take Loana's life. A moment later, Leona struggled to get up from the ground. The mushroom hut that she had lived in for 300 years was gone, and the huge, ugly crucible and herself no longer existed in this muddy space. Leona did not show the slightest expression of pain or regret after suffering such a heavy blow. Instead, an even uglier and more ferocious expression appeared on her ghost-like face. "I don't have long to live anyway, and today is a good day to fight you. Ivana, I'll be waiting for you in hell." Having said that, Leona leaped into the crucible, and her whole body was like melted ink, quickly dyeing the green soup black. A huge and terrifying despair spirit element flowed into the wooden sculpture that was covered with strange magic patterns, and then along a strange spiritual channel, a wave of pollution towards the spiritual node in the distance. Chapter 13-14. Truth be told, Grimm had never experienced such a dangerous battle before. Even when he had fought against two powerful beings alone, he had never been in such a sorry state. But today, from the sudden appearance of a terrible witch, he had personally experienced what it meant to be better off dead than alive, and what it meant to be in my territory. I call the shots. Ever since he had advanced to become an official magus, Grimm had not dreamt for hundreds of years. Magi had always been strict and cautious, and it was impossible for them to indulge themselves in a dream. If a magus really did dream, he would not treat it as a natural instinct. Instead, he would think that it was a feedback from the world will. It was either a sign or a warning. The higher the rank of a magus, the more they believed in it. The dream that Grimm had appeared in today was obviously not a reflection of his main body's consciousness. Otherwise, he would have been able to see some familiar scenes in the real world. However, the more monotonous this world was, the more restrictions Grimm faced. Firstly, this dreamscape was extremely lacking in fire elemental energy. To put it bluntly, the strange magus who had lured Grimm in with a dream guide spell had completely forbidden the fire elemental energy in this dreamscape. Putting a fire magus in a world without fire elemental energy meant that the opponent had disarmed Grimm from the very start. Secondly, in this strange dreamscape, the physical elements that made up the real world had all disappeared. Instead, there was an illusory and hazy spiritual force that was unimaginably abundant. This was the best place for enemies who were adept at spiritual force to display their strength. If Grimm had not mastered the multiple laws of fire, he would have been completely defenseless in this world. He would not even have the ability to protect himself. Fortunately, Grimm was not an ordinary magus. Fortunately, this was still a world. Although it could isolate the fire elemental energy, it could not deprive Grimm of his control over the laws of fire. In this dreamscape that did not exist in the real world, but only in the spiritual space, the laws of fire were no longer something that could not be seen or touched. Instead, they had become a super weapon that could be materialized at will. In any case, This world was filled with spiritual elements. It would be much easier to materialize the nomological powers that were originally hidden behind the scenes and driving the operation of the dimensional world. Hence, Grimm could only abandon his usual battle style and start using the weapons of laws in a clumsy and rigid manner. The reason why he was called clumsy was because he was really clumsy. In the past, Grimm had always relied on the divine fire pearl's powerful fire power to control the fire element. Then, when the fire elements converged to form a true fire wizard spell, he would add the corresponding law of fire to it in order to increase its might in a certain aspect. Now, without the divine fire orb to help him gather the fire elemental essence and the AI chip's powerful assistance on the battlefield, Grimm could only rely on the Book of Darkness and his powerful law of fire. Flame range increase, flame penetration, flame invisibility, flame impact. The 4 fire laws formed 4 different colored light orbs that lingered around Grimm's body, acting as the fire elements. Grimm used his powerful mental power to shape them, or transform them into a huge 4-colored shield in front of him, or condense them into law arrows to counterattack. It was Grimm's first time using the power of the laws, so he was unusually clumsy and stiff. Fortunately, he had the Book of Darkness to protect him. The rank 5 divine weapons power of law protected his consciousness very well, so he was not flustered by the witch's fierce attacks. Dreamscape's restrictions on Grimm were undoubtedly huge. However, under the pressure of the witch's fierce attacks, Grimm's mind operated at a high speed, and he actually managed to figure out a different way of using the laws. This was Dreamscape, so he could not summon the divine fire pearl and the shadow fiend. However, with the Book of Darkness in hand, Remy, the plague poison spirit, was summoned out as expected. Unlike the outside world, all life forms in Dreamscape appeared in the form of their souls. Hence, when Remy appeared, a green ball of light almost a meter in diameter appeared around Grimm. Where is this? What a strange world. As soon as the green light appeared, it looked around curiously. Its tones seemed to be filled with joy. This was a strange world shrouded in colorful fog. The edges of the world stretched endlessly into the distance, with no end in sight. Apart from the strange wooden plank they were standing on that was less than 100 meters wide, everything else around them was empty, as if there was nothing at all. And on this small battlefield, Grimm was engaged in a strange battle with 3 strange witches. Grimm's body was surrounded by 4 layers of strange light membranes of different colors, and the Book of Darkness in his hand was covered by a layer of even thicker, dazzling barrier. His enemies were 3 strange witches, which Havana hid in the depths of the fog and rarely took the initiative to attack. Instead, the other 2 rank 4 witches under her control brandished their sharp swords, their bodies overflowing with strange spiritual undulations. They surrounded Grimm's dazzling barrier and continuously hacked at the light barrier. Their every move seemed to be able to trigger the mental elements of this dreamscape. Whenever their attacks landed on the light barrier, the law of fire would shake violently. At the same time, strands of strange spiritual elements were transmitted to Grimm's consciousness at the same time, causing him to experience the pain of mental turmoil. Grimm had retaliated against these 2 witches, using an extremely condensed law arrow to kill one of them. Unfortunately, they did not seem to be true consciousnesses, but products of some kind of illusory and mental witchcraft. Once one was nailed to death, another would materialize from the depths of the fog in a matter of seconds, and it would continue to attack. Under their continuous attacks, even Grimm could not keep up with them, finding it difficult to pinpoint which Havana's position. From time to time, 1 or 2 powerful mental witchcraft would fly out from the depths of the fog, causing the light barrier created by the Book of Darkness to tremble and totter. In such an environment, Grimm's law power was undoubtedly being consumed quickly. Hence, the moment Remy was summoned, Grimm hurriedly gave him the order to fight. "Remy, stop messing around and block the enemy for me. I want to research a way to break out of this dreamscape." Grim quickly ordered. "Leave it to me," Remy answered, and in an instant, a huge toxic halo burst out, almost covering the entire battlefield. The two witches who had just rushed to Grim's side were immediately infected by the green light, and even their bodies began to melt into a puddle of sticky, smelly green liquid. However, before they died, they threw the swords in their hands straight into the green ball. In the next second, the strong burst of mental element caused Remy to cry out in alarm. Under normal circumstances, Remy's toxic halo would need at least 10 days to half a month to get rid of the terrifying poison. But here, in this strange world, the poison that Remy had expended a great deal of energy to activate only lasted for a few seconds before it disappeared completely under the guidance of a strange force. This world rejected all magical elements other than spiritual elements, which naturally included the power of poison. Although he had used up a lot of his energy to maintain the toxic halo for 3 seconds, he had still killed 2 enemies. While Remy was still feeling pleased with himself, figures flashed in the depths of the fog. The two witches once again grabbed their swords and rushed out. From the looks of it, they were almost the same as the previous two. Remy sucked in a breath of cold air, finally understanding why Grim had summoned him. In this strange world, one's power of law could only be used up, and their attacks were very weak. If the battle continued for such a long time, even a super expert would be exhausted. That was why Grim was so eager to get out of here. He could already see that this witch of unknown origin was far from reaching the level of a super strong person. The reason why she was so difficult to deal with was that this dreamscape gave her too much of a home field advantage. But just as Grim was thinking hard about how to break out of this dream, a shrill scream suddenly came from the depths of the fog. Then, a gigantic eyeball monster descended from the sky above the mist and smashed into the ground. The next moment, the fog shook and the power of law flowed. The strange witch was actually fighting with the huge monster that had appeared out of nowhere. Although the monster was huge, it was only at the beginning of Grade 3. If not for the large amount of despair element that came with the synchronized scroll, it wouldn't even be able to wipe the witch's shoes. In a few moves, the mysterious witch killed the strange monster. However, this fog was also polluted by the chaotic despair mental element, causing everyone's mental consciousness to be infected to varying degrees. Grim quickly increased the speed at which he poured his mental power into the Book of Darkness and protected Remy with the light of law. The terrifying despair mental element was like blobs of ink that quickly dyed the fog black. At this time, the sky seemed to be raining black ink. Waves and waves of mental power imbued with the aura of despair poured into the fog, crazily infecting and devouring everything. The light barrier of the Book of Darkness's light of law was covered with all kinds of strange black monsters. They had strange and twisted bodies and terrifying sharp teeth. They were crazily gnawing at the power of law on the light barrier. And in the depths of the fog, the witch's shrill scream became even more shrill and desperate. What's going on? Where did this strange power of despair come from? Chapter 13-15. To be honest, Grim had never experienced such a strange battle before. That mysterious enemy had failed before Grim could think of a strategy to deal with it. The reason for his failure was the interference of a third party. Grim, who was completely confused, was only stunned for a moment. His vision blurred, and his consciousness returned to the body beside the desk in the cabin. Grim's blank eyes suddenly lit up, and his snoring stopped. He suddenly stood up and reached out his hand. The flaming coral wizard staff and the Book of Darkness appeared in his hands. With the powerful amplification from the Vulcan bead, Grim immediately caught a trace of law fluctuation that was quickly fading away. It was obvious that the mysterious witch had realized that her attack had failed and was retreating. Grim smiled eerily. He concentrated his mental strength and instantly gathered a huge amount of power of law. He followed the trace of fluctuation in the void that hadn't completely dissipated and actually crossed the space to chase after him. Like a clay ox entering the sea, The huge amount of energy he had poured into the attack was instantly wasted. As the strange fluctuation disappeared without a trace, Grim did not know if it had caused any damage to the enemy. After scanning the area for a long time and confirming that the mysterious enemy had completely disappeared, Grim relaxed and could not help but cough out a mouthful of black blood. As if sensing the disturbance of Grim's mental strength, a red light flashed in the center of the cabin. It was Mary, who had teleported over. What happened? How did you suddenly gather such a huge amount of energy? Is there an enemy? Mary asked countless questions in one breath. Her eyes swept over the bloodstains on Grim's lips, and she frowned. She instantly rushed to him and asked sternly, "Where is the enemy?" Grim shook his head and smiled bitterly. "Already left." "Which side?" "It should be the Northern Witches, but I'm not sure if it's an individual move or the Northern Witches' idea." "Northern Witches? Do you know who she is?" Mary's expression became more and more ferocious, as if she was going to devour someone. "She's a grade 4 witch. She's good at illusions and dream kill. It shouldn't be difficult to find her." "Oomph. These Northern Witches are going too far. Now that they dare to openly come out and assassinate you, it's time for us to teach them a lesson." Mary said hatefully, "The Northern lands also have a few strongholds in the central region. I'll send people to kill them all." "Don't be rash." Grim grabbed Mary and shook his head. "Now is the time for the central continent to decide the final winner. We can't make any trouble at this time. I'll remember this grudge for now. I'll settle it with them bit by bit after I've unified the central region. Moreover, I gave her a vicious blow just now. I believe she won't be able to endure this blow." Grim's words were filled with confidence in his new power. "Then I'll move in. Otherwise, some bastard would take advantage of you while you're injured." Mary said angrily. "That's great." Grim's face immediately revealed an overjoyed expression. Mary caught a glimpse of it, and her heart skipped a beat. The anger on her face immediately turned into shyness, and she rolled her eyes at him. The murderous aura in the room was immediately dispersed. Instead, it was replaced by a thick and gentle aura. Bastard, 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 the North Pole, the kingdom of cold wind. A series of sharp curses came from the wizard's pagoda in the middle of the howling plains. "Loanna, you bastard, I can't believe you're still alive after so many years. Damn it, you've messed up all my plans." A mysterious witch wrapped in a pitch-black veil was cursing loudly and angrily. In front of her eyes, the level 4 illusion crystal that had been with her for 600 years, the lost paradise, fell to the cold ground with a crash, shattering into pieces and shattering into pieces. A terrifying, pitch-black substance was leaking out of the shattered crystal. It was the despair that which Loanna had released by burning her soul and using all of her blood essence. If a normal person were to come into contact with it, they would definitely be assimilated by the intense despair, becoming a crazed murderer with a twisted mind. Even official wizards who came into contact with it would be corrupted into monsters that only knew how to kill and harm themselves. Even a level 4, which like Ivana, was unwilling to be entangled by such intense negative emotions. After all, it would take a lot of effort for her to get rid of this intense and extreme hatred. However, while she was angrily cursing Leona for courting death, Ivana lifted her head, looking at the dome of the hall in disbelief. There, a wormhole with a diameter of a meter had suddenly formed, and a terrifying torrent of flames surged out of it. These are not ordinary magical flames, but they were the flames of law formed by the pure and refined law of fire. This was what Ivana was most afraid of. Bastard. Ivana's expression changed drastically. She only had time to shatter the Beast Fong wizard weapon hanging from her neck before her entire body was engulfed by the surging law of fire. In the next moment, the towering wizard tower suddenly trembled, and from the windows and cracks on the top floor, tens of meters long, red tongues of flame spewed out, and a smoky, burning smell instantly filled the air. The wizard tower was also ignited with thick black smoke, which could be seen from tens of miles away. A moment later, An ear-piercing scream that tore through the clouds spread across the entire plain. Grim, I'm not done with you. Half a month later, the huge flying fleet passed through one territory after another, flying over one mountain after another. Finally, the front suddenly became clear. The tall mountain range was left behind, and the undulating sea of trees gradually faded away. What appeared in front of them was a vast expanse of green fields and a large area of human settlements. There were villages, towns, cities, farmlands, manors. Of course, there were also many strange and unique castles and villas. The Wizard Tower was the grandest building of witchcraft, and no matter where it was a well-deserved focus of power. They were like surveillance towers placed on the ground, using their powerful witchcraft abilities to spread the will of the wizards to every corner of the world. This was the territory ruled by the Enchantment family. At this point, the Crimson Fleet did not rush to advance towards Kisling Castle. Instead, they split into three, led by Grim, Mary, and Arms respectively, and began to sweep the outskirts of the Enchantment family's wizard pagoda. As long as it was a property that belonged to the Enchantment family in name, be it a manor, a castle, or a densely populated city, the Crimson Fleet would swagger over it, chasing away and killing the core members of the Enchantment family. As for those who resisted stubbornly, no matter if they were hiding in a castle or a manor, a blast from the magic cannons of the floating giant warships would turn them into ashes, their souls vanquished. An ordinary building like that, even with the protection of a wizard formation, could not withstand the bombardment of the magic cannons. If one shot was not enough, then 2 shots would be fired, and if 2 shots were not enough, then 3 shots would be fired. This was not his territory anyway, and Grim could not be bothered to waste time with the other party, nor would he send troops to occupy it. Anyone who did not surrender would be bombarded by the giant cannons without a second word. The power of the magic cannons was a mild threat to a level 4 wizard and a fatal threat to a level 3 wizard. Therefore, even if the wizards of Enchantment rushed out to fight, they would not be able to withstand the continuous bombardment of the magic cannons. If they were to get close, a concentrated attack from the battle magic machinery would be enough to turn them into dust, leaving not even their bones behind. As for the wizard towers in key areas, they were the main targets of the Crimson Fleet. Rosur City, a large city between the Implon Hills and the Kali River. It was also the largest and most prosperous location of the Enchantment family in the Ironic region. Of course, there was also a large wizard tower built here. When Grim led the 3 floating warships and stopped 3 miles away from the city, he stood high above the clouds and silently looked down at the human city that was the size of a chessboard. With the help of powerful spells, he could still see the human figures running around the city in panic. The tall wizard tower was like a gray stone pillar, standing quietly in the center of the city. It was covered in layers of force field protection, and a shocking amount of magical energy flowed on top of the tower. Not a single wizard could be sensed in the city. All the wizards of the Enchantment family had hidden in the wizard tower and put up all kinds of defensive spells, secretly watching the Crimson Fleet's every move. To be honest, they thought that the Crimson Fleet had come here to show off. They never thought that the other party had the ability and determination to attack the wizard tower. Shout to them. As long as they are willing to come out and surrender, they can protect their people and land. Otherwise, we'll attack. Grim looked down coldly and ordered Wizard Locke, the commander of the fleet. Wizard Locke accepted the order and immediately used a super large loudspeaker to broadcast Grim's words to the entire Rosur city. The loud sound waves traveled to every corner of the city, and the citizens in the city were on tenterhooks. Naturally, surrendering was impossible. The level 2 wizard guarding the wizard's pagoda immediately rejected Wizard Locke's suggestion and replied fiercely, "Attack if you have the guts. We will completely annihilate you under the wizard's tower." Grim was naturally very happy to meet such a troublemaker. At his signal, the flagship, Viscero, and the other 2 giant airships slowly moved forward, gradually bringing the wizard tower into the attack range of the magic cannons. Chapter 13:16. The wizard's pagoda trembled, its energy dissipating. The energy beam hit the defensive force field, and the body of the tower immediately turned red. Two terrifying forces clashed in the air, annihilating each other, accompanied by the crackling sounds of the energy field walls collapsing. The entire wizard tower was instantly ignited into a towering torch, emitting a glaring, dazzling, and terrifying red light. The wizard's pagoda was in chaos. All the wizards of the Intim family connected their minds to the tower spirit, and the mental channel was in chaos. Give up on the energy supply for number 1 to 9 and transfer all the energy to the defense outside the wizard's pagoda. Quick! No, the energy supply for number 7 to 9 cannot be interrupted, or we will lose the ability to retaliate. Nonsense, the defense outside the wizard's pagoda is about to collapse. What use can your attack spell formation be? Listen to me, prioritize all the energy for the defensive force field. I object. With the Crimson family's army at their borders, the Intim family did not dare face them head-on, and could only gather the main forces and core wizards of the family back to Kesslin Castle. Hence, the highest-level wizard guarding the wizard's pagoda in a family like Loker City was only level 2. This was clearly not compatible with the level of the wizard's pagoda, and naturally could not unleash the power that the wizard's pagoda should have. Against the fierce attack from the main cannon of the Crimson Fleet's flagship, the wizard's pagoda, it was hard for it to withstand. Finally, the energy beam began to weaken after a dozen attacks. The first attack from the giant magic cannon did not break through the tough defensive force field outside the wizard's pagoda. But before the wizards of the Intim family could heave a sigh of relief, their hearts were in their mouths again. That was because the Viscero airship was slowly retreating, only to be replaced by another airship of equal size. That terrifying magic cannon had long since been fully charged, and the terrifying whistling of energy was enough to shake one's soul. Quick, replenish the energy and repair the outer layer of defense as soon as possible. The ear-piercing screams of many wizards immediately came from within the wizard's pagoda. But in the next moment, their voices were drowned out by the terrifying energy beam. Another energy beam streaked through the air for nearly 3 miles and accurately bombarded the same spot as the previous attack. The force field barrier that had just disappeared appeared once again. Relying on the layers of force field walls, it once again blocked the energy beam's bombardment. The force field walls could not withstand the pincer attack and annihilation of the two forces and collapsed one after another. However, a steady stream of magical energy gushed out from within the wizard's pagoda, and the damaged force field walls were replaced by new force field walls. The force field walls relied on the dissipation and disintegration of this energy to barely defend against the enemy's attacks. After a dozen or so finger strikes, the energy beam dissipated. The second attack had ended. The floating airships in the sky changed positions again, and the third airship slowly floated up under the horrified gazes of the Intim family's wizards. Damn it! Counterattack! Counterattack! We must counterattack! Otherwise, we'll just be sitting ducks. Once the wizard's pagoda is breached, none of us will be able to survive. Under the command of the mid-level wizards in the family, the body of the wizard's pagoda trembled slightly, and layers of blinding magical radiance lit up on the body of the tower. Countless runic lines filled with magical energy lit up in an orderly manner, lighting up one offensive spell formation after another. In the next second, magic lightning that was as thick as dancing silver snakes, ice blades and snow sword that were as dense as spears, huge clusters of sticky and stinky venom, and shadow arrows that were as dark as ink all bombarded the airships in the distance like a storm. The airship that was preparing the magical energy cannons did not move an inch, showing no signs of retreating or defending. The other two airships that were lagging behind propped up a strange protective barrier, trapping the airship within it. This was a special protective barrier formed by the fusion of an energy shield and an anti-magic barrier, and had a strange effect on defending against elemental wizard spells. The defensive barrier collided with the spells that were shooting over like raindrops, and the sky exploded into dazzling fireworks. But without waiting for the ripples of the explosions to dissipate, a pillar of pure white energy shot out from within, once again striking the energy field defense of the wizard's pagoda. This time, the energy field defense of the wizard's pagoda could no longer withstand such a ferocious energy attack, and it started to crumble layer by layer. Soon, a 10-meter-wide hole was dug into the energy field defense, and the pillar of energy finally struck the body of the tower without any obstruction. The defensive spell formations on the body of the tower lit up one after another, the dazzling wizard runes lighting up one after another. The dust and dirt on the walls were instantly pushed out by the invisible energy field, and the parts of the tower that were enveloped by the pillar of energy started glowing red as boiling lava. The energy pillar finally died out after 15 seconds, and a giant scar 3 meters in diameter was left on the towering body of the wizard's pagoda. From afar, it looked as if a giant had used a giant cigar to fiercely burn a scar on the wall of the tower. Luckily, the wizard's pagoda was constructed from high-grade black obsidian, and it had extraordinary magical resistance and decent physical defense. That was why it had barely survived this round of attacks from the giant cannons. But even though the area where the pillar of energy shone had cooled down and returned to normal, there were still traces of damage left behind, and it became a weak spot on the wall of the tower. Taking advantage of the cool down of the giant cannons, the magical energy in the energy pool at the bottom of the wizard's pagoda was maniacally extracted and injected into the walls of the wizard's pagoda. Relying on the powerful wizard spell formation, the broken energy field defense was once again repaired, and the wizard's pagoda was once again sealed up. As for the minor damage on the walls, they could only slowly repair it after the battle. At least during the battle, no wizard from the Enchantment family would dare to risk the enemy's cannons to repair the wizard's pagoda. That was not bravery, but stupidity. To think that the Crimson family already possesses such terrifying wizard techniques. Within the wizard's pagoda, the few level 2 wizards left behind by the Enchantment family all had expressions of fear and roared. Where did they get such massive magical energy? Could they have hidden a wizard's pagoda in that giant metal battleship? It was no wonder that the wizards from the Enchantment family were so shocked. To their knowledge, the most powerful thing in the world was the War Wizard's Pagoda. The War Wizard's Pagoda had a perfect energy pool, energy conduction system, defensive and offensive wizard formations. It could store the magical energy gathered during normal times and draw it out during the battle to meet the energy requirements of the War Wizard's Pagoda. Such a perfect wizard facility provided a safe place for the wizards to unleash their destructive power to their heart's content. Naturally, it became a synonym for the most powerful force in the hearts of the wizards. But today, the Crimson family dared to go against a large wizard tower with just 3 giant metal battleships floating in the sky. This was clearly beyond the understanding of the wizards from the Enchantment family. They were all shocked, their faces sluggish. All this while, they had thought that the Crimson family was rich and relied on burning magical crystals to power these massive ships. But now, they realized their mistake. It was obvious that these giant metal battleships had a power source that was not any weaker than the Wizard's Pagoda's energy pool. Otherwise, the energy beam of that level would not have lasted for so long, nor would it have been so powerful. The miniaturization and portability of the energy pool and elemental pool had always been the main topic of research and experimentation by many large wizard families. But they did not expect them to appear within the Crimson family. Also, from the ease with which the Crimson battleships advanced and retreated, as well as the magical energy cannons and strange protective barriers, it seemed like the Crimson family was already adept at applying these technologies to various aspects of the battle. The Crimson family had many hidden powers and tricks up their sleeves. Move out! Move out! Immediately order the swamp flying dragons to attack. We can't let them attack the wizard's pagoda so recklessly. We have to retaliate. A few cruel and bloodthirsty wizards shouted sternly. Under their instigation and command, black doors opened in the middle of the wizard's pagoda, and nearly 100 strange swamp-flying dragons swarmed out from within. Furthermore, on the backs of the flying dragons, there were many sorcerer apprentices dressed in robes of various colors. They were all holding high-level magic sticks and wizard scrolls in their hands. Once they got close, they would instantly cast wizard spells that blanketed the area and pulverized their enemies like a torrential storm. If the enemy wanted to engage in close combat, then the swamp-flying dragon mounts would also leave a terrifying memory in their minds. They had teeth and fangs as sharp as guillotines, thick and powerful hind limbs and giant claws, terrifying spitting venom, and ear-piercing screeches. The swamp-flying dragons had the blood of the dragon race coursing through their veins. Even though their quality could not compare to the weakest pure-blooded dragons, they were still a flying, ferocious beast that could not be underestimated once they gathered together. The combination of a pseudo-dragon mount and an apprentice who could cast witchcraft was perfect for both physical and witchcraft attacks. Unfortunately, such a team was like a pile of flying rotten meat in front of the giant crimson battleship. After putting away the magical energy cannons, hundreds of magical energy cannons extended from the bottom and sides of the massive floating sky battleship. The dark muzzles of the cannons adjusted as the enemies approached. Just as the marsh wyverns entered their firing range, boom, 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 hundreds of magical fireballs rained down from the sky like a meteor shower, shooting towards them. With the magic resistance of the swamp-flying dragons, 1 or 2 fireballs would not be able to kill them. Chapter 13:17. Dodge. Dodge. Everyone move at high speed. The leader of the swamp wyverns was a true magus. Even he felt his scalp go numb and his heart beat wildly when he saw the dense fireballs trailing behind them. Under his frenzied urging, the swamp wyvern beneath him raised its neck and folded its wings, its entire body darting through the dense fireballs like an arrow as it charged toward the giant airship with great difficulty. Behind him, his companions were also frantically evading the attacks. Unfortunately, the energy fireballs were too dense. Dodging one meant dodging two, and dodging two meant dodging a group. There were even a few swamp wyverns that crashed into each other due to their panic. For a moment, the sounds of exploding fireballs, the pained hisses of the swamp wyverns, and the shouts of the acolytes intertwined, creating a cacophony of noise. Asterisk bang bang bang. Asterisk a series of exploding fireballs triggered terrifying shockwaves of flames, making the battlefield even more hostile and unpredictable. One by one, the swamp wyverns crashed into the fireballs, their flight paths disrupted and causing even more fireballs to explode. Brilliant fireworks exploded in midair. In the blink of an eye, more than 20 swamp wyverns and the acolytes on their backs were blasted into smithereens. Large swathes of wyvern corpses and purple dragon blood rained down, creating a spectacular scene. Even more swamp wyverns charged into the clouds with magical barriers, closing in on the giant airships. At this moment, the edges of the airships were filled with metal magic machinery, waiting for the enemy to arrive. They raised their energy barriers and activated the densely packed magical cannons on their bodies, waiting for the enemy to arrive. The magical cannons had a range of 700 meters, far exceeding the range of the swamp wyvern's venom. Hence, the first wave of attack was initiated by the metal magic machinery. The 3 airships were arranged in a triangular formation, with the flagship, Viscero, slightly behind them. When the swamp wyverns carried the acolytes on their backs and flapped their wings with all their might, the sides of the 3 airships fired small fireballs as dense as a storm. The sorcerer who had just rushed into the clouds felt a chill in his heart. His eyes widened in shock as he saw the dense fireballs smashing toward him. The previous volley of mana fireballs only amounted to about 300. Although they looked densely packed, there was still a lot of space between the fireballs that could be dodged. However, the volley of cannons in front of him had turned into a real rain of fireballs. There was no way he could dodge them with his body movement. Without any hesitation, he activated the shield gem in his hand that was about to break out in sweat. In the next moment, a magic barrier enveloped him and the swamp wyvern king beneath him. Just as the barrier was formed, the dense fireballs exploded into a sea of fire. In the blink of an eye, a dozen swamp wyverns fell from the sky. Get out of the enemy's attack range. Get out of the enemy's attack range. Fly high into the sky and launch a diving attack. Under the sorcerer's command, the swamp wyvern king flew higher and higher. Finally, it surpassed the giant airship and soared above its head. At this angle, the magic cannons of the airship could hardly hit him. Only the rows of metal magic machinery on the spacious flight deck could raise their arms and continue to bombard him with fireballs. Circling above the enemy's head and dodging the fireballs that were shooting at him, the Magus frantically took out strange seeds and threw them at the deck. The seeds were only the size of a fist and were light as a feather, almost weightless. When they floated with the wind and landed on the flight deck, tender green sprouts extended from within. Although these sprouts were pink and tender, their penetrative power was no weaker than a high-grade enchanted weapon. The tender green sprouts pierced into the metal deck that was half a meter thick and quickly drilled and extended. They ate everything and devoured everything. This was the uniqueness of these strange magic plants. Using the metal materials they devoured, the strange magic plants rapidly expanded and quickly turned into a powerful life form that resembled a metal octopus. They waved their 10-meter-long metal tentacles and rampaged on the flight deck, knocking down metal magic machinery or wrapping them up and throwing them out like meteor hammers. The metal magic machinery quickly moved and surrounded the metal octopus from all directions. They used their frenzied firepower to crush the metal octopus, breaking its stems and causing its juices to flow. Unfortunately, these strange magic plants had a strong life force. Even after being shot into a sieve, they were still lively. If the demonized consciousness in its metal head was not wiped out, it would not die. In an instant, the entire flight deck was thrown into chaos by them. Screech! There was a sharp sound of an arrow exploding. A strangely shaped magic arrow streaked across the chaotic battlefield, piercing through the metal octopus's waving tentacles and piercing straight into its big head that was flashing with a metallic luster. In the next second, the arrow exploded and magical flames spewed out from the gaps in the octopus's head. The powerful magic plant that had been showing off a moment ago instantly went limp, and the metal materials it had absorbed scattered all over the ground. Its half-metal, half-plant body turned into a puddle of viscous green liquid in the blink of an eye, corroding the metal deck beneath it with a sizzling sound. Magic Archer Sando, who was already a Grade 2 intermediate magic archer, suddenly appeared on the flight deck. She held a strangely shaped metal longbow that was covered in strange magic runes. She turned around and ordered the dozen or so subordinates who were following closely behind her. "You guys stay on the deck and take care of these metal octopuses. I'll go and kill the culprits." These subordinates all carried magic longbows and magic short swords on their waists. They were all blood elves with the title of Magic Archer. With that, Magic Archer Sando arrived at the edge of the flight deck in a few leaps. She pushed off with her slender feet and flew up like a goshawk. At this moment, the wizard riding on the swamp wyvern king had just arrived. When he saw Sando moving like lightning, he immediately waved his magic wand without hesitation. A terrifying black smoke immediately wrapped around her body. Sando let out a soft roar, and the blood aura around her exploded, repelling the black smoke that wrapped around her. She swung the giant bow in her hand, and a magic explosive arrow immediately shot towards the wizard like a bolt of lightning. A Grade 2 intermediate magic archer versus a Grade 1 advanced magic archer. There was no suspense in this kind of battle. The magic explosive arrow instantly pierced the wizard's forehead, and his entire head exploded like a watermelon, splattering blood everywhere. The Swamp Wyvern King had just raised its neck and let out a cry, but before it could dive down, it felt its body sink. Sando had already jumped onto its back. She switched the magic bow to her left hand and pulled out a short sword with her right hand. With a light slash, the huge wyvern's head was severed from its neck, and it tumbled down from the sky. Sandor stepped on the wyvern's corpse and scanned the sky for her next target. Then, she leaped into the air and dashed over. Midway, the magic bow vibrated, and another magic explosive arrow pierced into the back of a swamp wyvern at lightning speed. In the next second, the arrow exploded, and the wizard apprentice on it immediately screamed in pain and fell from the sky. Sando crossed paths with Sando in midair, and with a flash of cold light, another head flew high into the sky. Sando stepped on the remains of the swamp wyverns and once again leaped into the sky. Sando fully displayed the agility and magical attacks of a blood elf magic archer. It was as if she was butchering cats and dogs, knocking the swamp wyverns and wizard apprentices out of the sky, and then beheading them one by one. Massacre. This was a blatant massacre. More than 100 swamp wyverns, coupled with fully armed acolytes, could easily take down a mid-sized human kingdom without a problem. But on the sorcerer's battlefield, it didn't even cause a big splash before vanishing into thin air. At the end of the day, the Wizard Tower of Lokar City was just a regional city. It was rare to have a wizard army of this scale. After the swamp wyverns were wiped out, the Wizard's Pagoda lost its defensive power to continue fighting against the Crimson Fleet. It could only use a dense defensive force field to protect itself, and no longer dared to send anyone out to fight. Thus, the Crimson Fleet deployed more than 300 magical weapon legions and began to sweep through Rockwell City with the help of the Air Force. It had to be said that the armies of the human kingdoms did not even have the ability to fight back when faced with a real wizard army. The 300 magical weapon legions advanced in formation, and a volley of cannons destroyed the walls of Rockwell City. As for the secular guards of Rockwell City, they did not even have the courage to fight when faced with hundreds of indestructible, tall, and steel-like metal magical weapons. They immediately scattered. This was actually a good thing. Once they were determined to attack the magical weapon legions, perhaps the Crimson Fleet would no longer be so courteous. The 3 giant floating ships would only need 2 or 3 volleys of attacks to destroy nearly half of the buildings in the city. When that time came, the citizens of Rockwell City would definitely be buried along with the Enum family. After dispersing the guards of Rockwell City, the magical weapon legions split into small combat teams and began advancing along the streets toward the Wizard's Pagoda. The 3 giant floating ships floated above them, acting as a protective umbrella. The giant floating ships approached while exchanging attacks with the Wizard Tower. With the existence of the magic furnace, each floating ship was no weaker than a Wizard Tower. With 3 against 1, the other party could only defend themselves and did not have much power to retaliate. The Crimson Fleet had sent out ground troops to quickly wear down the energy reserves of the Wizard's Pagoda. There was no other way. Before the energy reserves of the cleansing Wizard Tower were depleted, it would be difficult for the Crimson Fleet to attack the Wizard Tower, which had a complete offensive and defensive system. Chapter 13-18. 3 days later, the smoke in Local City had not completely dissipated. The inside of the city was full of broken walls, scorched frames with burnt roofs, billowing black smoke, and a terrible, pungent stench. The Wizard Tower in the center of the city had also lost its former grandeur and magnificence. It stood there like a half-burnt stick, its appearance full of endless misery and desolation. The Wizard's Pagoda had been breached. The 16 wizards from the Enum family had undoubtedly become captives of the Crimson Fleet, including 13 level 1 wizards and 3 level 2 wizards. The reason why they did not use the teleportation formation inside the Wizard's Pagoda to escape was not because they did not want to, but because the Crimson Fleet had used a wizard formation to disrupt the teleportation in the surroundings the moment they arrived in Local City. Therefore, the remaining wizards from the Intim family in Local City were abandoned, obediently raising their hands and surrendering after the wizard's pagoda was breached. According to the rules of war in the wizard world, neither side was allowed to kill wizard captives who had given up resisting. Otherwise, they would be spurned and boycotted by all wizards. There is no sorcerer who did not cherish his own life. Although these wizards had signed a service contract with the Intim family and needed to exchange their service and loyalty for corresponding resources or status. But this did not mean that they had to sacrifice their lives for the Intim family. Therefore, the moment the Wizard Tower was breached, their contract mission was considered completed. The rest was to obediently raise their hands and think of ways to exchange resources or something else for their freedom. After all, if they were really core members of the Intim family, they would not have been abandoned under the butcher knife of the Crimson family at such a dangerous time. The Crimson Fleet stayed there for 2 days, waiting for the other 2 fleets to arrive. Mary and Arms each led 2 giant floating warships to sweep through the other 2 territories of the Intim family. From the way they returned, it was obvious that they were in high spirits and had gained a lot. War was undoubtedly the fastest way to amass wealth. Although most of the resources had been collected by the Intim family back to Cothran Castle, the little that was left was enough for Grimm and his men to eat until their mouths were full. After the 3 Crimson Fleets merged back into one, they did not stop and headed straight for Cursling Castle. This was only possible because the Crimson family possessed a large number of airships. If it were any other Magus family, they would have brought along a large number of wizard beasts, subsidiary armies, and the servants of the nobles who did the dirty work. They wouldn't have been able to advance so unscrupulously. None of these fellows could fly. Not only was their speed slow, but their reliance on logistics and supplies was also a headache. If he were to bring them out to fight, he could only steadily attack one pass at a time. Otherwise, once the supply line was cut off, the wizard beast army would still be fine, but the subsidiary army and the noble servant army would definitely collapse. However, these problems did not exist in front of the Crimson Fleet. All of the core, troops, supplies, and resources were stored inside the airships. Only in battle would these things be fully displayed to the enemy. Normally, they would be hidden from view. Without the ground troops, there was no need to fight all the way. After taking over 3 territories of the Intim family, Grimm received a message he had been waiting for. Without hesitation, he ordered the Crimson Fleet to advance towards Cursling Castle at high speed. The battle at Gravel Valley could only be said to have lifted the veil of the Central Continent, exposing the internal conflicts of the Scattered Tower Forest. With Grimm as the leader, the new force had gathered enough power to topple the existing forces of the Central Continent. And Crushed Stone Canyon was the first stop. However, due to the interference of too many external factors, the victory was a sloppy one. The victory was unclear. Therefore, the attack on the existing forces had not reached the point of making them submit. This caused the Scattered Tower Forest, and even the entire Central Continent, to face the danger of splitting. Once freed, and the others had the time and opportunity, they would definitely sell out the Central Continent to lure in the external forces. By then, the entire Scattered Tower Forest would inevitably be filled with the flames of war. If he did not want to destroy his future base, the battle at Cursling Castle had to be fought, and it was a battle he had to win. Grimm's advance was slow, and he even had the time to sweep through 3 territories of the Intim family. It was not because he was not anxious, nor was it because the situation was not urgent enough. It was because the time was not right. Grimm was waiting. He was waiting for Alice to send a message that the time was right. Life was like a chess piece, and fate was like a chessboard. He was slowly approaching, forcing the enemy to make some irrational decisions. Once the enemy did so, to Grimm, his advance was no longer bullying the weak, disrupting the Central Continent, and fighting for territory. It had a more positive meaning. It was to set things right and to give the Central Continent a new order. All of this was not for the world to see, but for fate to see. At his level, with the help of Alice, the leader of the Witches of Fate, fate was no longer a mysterious thing that could not be seen or touched. Instead, it was a great power that could be touched, and he could borrow strength from it. Ever since he had advanced to rank 4, everything Grimm had been done in consideration of the interests of the Magi community as a whole. Many times, he did not hesitate to harm the interests of the Crimson family in order to disguise himself as someone who cared about the big picture and endured humiliation. He clearly had the strength of a powerful being, but he still pretended to be weak in the Central Continent. He established the Horton School of Witchcraft, sacrificing the Crimson family's short-term interests to promote the disintegration of the Magi families in the Central Continent. Even the confrontation between the Grade 4 forces was initiated by him, and the Crimson family could only passively accept it. All of these made Grimm's actions seem passive and cowardly, but also allowed him to successfully avoid the counterattack of the plane's consciousness, positioning himself as a righteous person. This identity was very important. The reason so many geniuses and seniors were rejected by the Magus world was because they did not know how to restrain themselves and were unscrupulous. The sorcerer world had nurtured so many high-grade experts not to let them wreak havoc in their own world, but to treat them as high-grade slaves and high-grade thugs. This way, if a foreign civilization invaded, the Magus world would be able to gather enough power to expel the enemy. The relationship between the Magus world and the Magi was like that between a beehive and a swarm of bees. Only when the swarm of bees grew stronger would they be able to plunder more resources and people from the outside world. Only then would the beehive be able to improve itself. The beehive would also bring more benefits to the swarm of bees, allowing them to fly faster, sharpen their claws, and become stronger. The two complemented each other, forming a mutually beneficial symbiotic relationship. However, the damage that super magi caused to the laws of the plane was too great. Thus, the Magus world had no choice but to expel super magi who exceeded the limits of the plane. Otherwise, if they were allowed to wreak havoc in the plane, they would sooner or later become a cancer in the development of the plane. Once these fellows were targeted by the plane's consciousness, they would be devoured by the power of destiny sooner or later. Thus, Grimm had to be careful and use various methods to conceal his ambitions. Although any Magus could see his ambitions, it just happened to be useful against the plane's consciousness. This was because the plane's consciousness only cared about the results, not the process. To be more precise, the plane's consciousness had not evolved to the point where it could distinguish the subtle emotions of humans. It could only judge the value of one's existence from the impact of one's actions on the world. This slight difference gave Grimm the possibility of borrowing the power of destiny to move forward to the plane's consciousness. It was always fair and just. The Magi born in the Central Continent were all its children and resources. Regardless of whether it was Freed and the others who represented the existing forces or Grimm who represented the new forces, they were all members of the scattered forest of towers. They were all part of the plane's consciousness. When these two groups fought and conflicted, the existence of the group that was more beneficial to the Magus world would become the target of the plane's consciousness. Every action of the plane's consciousness was completed through the manipulation of the power of destiny. Thus, Alice could completely guess the true intentions of the plane's consciousness by observing and sensing the flow and changes of the power of destiny in the Central Continent. Just as the Crimson Fleet dawdled in their attack on Loker City, revealing their empty rear, Freed and the others, who had been intimidated by the Crimson Will, finally made a decision. Their decision was not known to the outside world, but it could not be hidden from the omnipresent plane's consciousness. Thus, the balance of destiny, which had always been fair, finally tilted. After Grimm received Alice's hint, he did not hesitate and immediately led his army to attack Fort Cothran. The ferocity and speed of the attack far exceeded the enemy's imagination. Thus, on the 7th day after the Crimson Fleet invaded the Intim family's territory, The giant floating warship finally arrived at Fort Cothran. This was a war fortress that was on high alert. All of the retreating wizard troops and family wizards gathered outside Fort Cothran, relying on the war wizard towers and defense spell formations. They looked like they were going to fight to the end. Chapter 1319. The Crimson Fleet was slowly approaching Fort Cothran. Each of the 7 airships had a sleek outline and a large and imposing stature. When they leaped out from the horizon, the hearts of everyone who witnessed this scene couldn't help but tremble slightly, and an icy coldness secretly arose from the bottom of their hearts. On the ground, the goblin chariots, eyeball mechs, combat magic machines, and the huge Magigolan dragon converged into a torrent of steel, sweeping up a huge cloud of dust. This was a terrifying magic machine army of nearly 10,000. In comparison, the small castles and fortresses that the Intim family had set up along the way were like low mud walls in front of a bulldozer. They did not even have the ability to block the enemy's advance before they were destroyed by the ferocious cannons and high-energy light beams. This was already the core territory of the Intim family. After operating here for hundreds of years, they had naturally built a set of powerful and complete defense system, as well as a similarly powerful wizard army. Unfortunately, they were made of flesh and blood after all. No matter how powerful the sorcerer army was, their fortifications would be turned into ruins by the bombardment of the cannons. Even if they mustered up their last bit of courage to charge forward, they would be turned into sieves by the dense rain of high-energy light beams. The difference in strength between the two sides was too great. It was so great that it could no longer be made up with skill and experience. Regardless if they were hiding underground, in the dense forest, or invisible, they could not escape the scanning of more than 30 wave frequencies on the floating warships, nor could they escape the detection of the eyeball mechs that were as dense as a swarm of locusts. If they were hiding underground, a gravity barrier would crush the enemy's flesh and blood, and the enemy's body would explode into a bloody pulp, mixing with the crushed stone and soil, and could no longer be distinguished. If they were hiding in the dense forest, a wave of cannons would shatter them into pieces along with the ancient trees, and they could no longer be pieced together. As for those who dared to approach the fleet stealthily, they would be turned into sieves by the storm of high-energy light beams, and then be crushed by the magic machine army that followed closely behind. The murderous magic machine army strictly followed the orders given by the floating warships, lining up all the enemies at a distance of 1,000 meters. This was also the best distance for the magic cannons to unleash their full power. The Intim family was the leader of the Tier 4 forces that dominated the scattered tower forest. Naturally, the hidden power within the family was not limited to just this. From the moment the Magic Machine Legion stepped into the core territory, all kinds of traps, ambushes, and special sorcerers began to harass and attack the Crimson Fleet. The Magic Machinery Legion was responsible for clearing out all hostile forces on the ground, while the protection of the Crimson Fleet was handed over to the Goblin Mechanical Warlocks. They formed mobile patrol squads that patrolled the airship's deck day and night. Once a powerful wizard or creature invaded, they would work together with the battle magic machinery to block the enemy outside the ship. The Magi of the Crimson family also boarded the ship, becoming an integral part of the defense system. They were scattered at the various entrances and exits of the airship, strictly guarding the door leading to the interior of the airship. It was because of their joint defense that the Crimson Fleet was able to push back the enemy's fierce counterattacks as they advanced step by step, and also thwarted the enemy's attempts to seize the ship again and again. Finally, after 2 days of arduous trekking, the Crimson Fleet finally crossed the last 100 miles and appeared in front of the towering Fort Cothran. The Crimson Fleet quickly came to a stop and hovered high above the clouds. They used the clouds to conceal themselves, revealing only the lower half of their silvery white bodies. The Magic Machinery Legion slowly arrived behind them and slowly spread out their formation, confronting the Intim family sorcerers from afar. The 100-meter-tall golem dragon mixed in the back of the Magic Machinery Legion, like a giant mechanical dragon bearing its fangs and claws. There was no need to fight it. Just by looking at its huge and heavy body, it gave people a deep sense of despair, as if they had fallen into a bottomless abyss. As if sensing the danger of the battle, the earth shook violently, and the towering Fort Cothran began to transform in front of the Crimson Sorcerers. Fort Cothran. The current Fort Cothran was no longer the silent and stable five-story fortress of the past, but had become a monster. A real monster. Fort Cothran trembled on its outer walls. Some of the rocks and reliefs that were not strong enough were peeled off and rolled down in the violent tremors. The huge main building of Fort Cothran was squirming like a monster, trying its best to pull its stone body out of the cracked soil. Its movements were so urgent and violent that the entire earth was shaking and shattering. Looking from afar, Fort Cothran was like a terrifying monster that crawled out from the ground. Its entire body was flowing with sand and stones like a torrential rain. Hundreds of years of silence had caused its body to accumulate too much dust and debris. At this moment, the accumulated grime flowed down rapidly like a river, gradually revealing large chunks of greenish-gray rock base. The surface of these rocks was rough and even looked uneven. But within it, a powerful torrent of energy similar to life energy flowed slowly. It was this torrent of energy that firmly stuck the huge pieces of iron rock onto the mountain-like body of Cothran Castle, allowing it to wriggle and struggle. Like a real life form, it broke free from the shackles of the earth and slowly stood up in front of everyone's eyes. Almost in an instant, Fort Cothran was animated into a strange and ferocious giant beast with a giant iron rock as its body and the main body of the castle as its head. Outside of its huge body, a layer of extremely powerful distorted force field appeared silently. Grim, do you think you're the only one with a trump card? The giant beast straightened its body, and from within Fort Cothran came Frid's distorted and old voice. Hee, since you're here, I'll let you have a taste of the power of a battle castle. It's just a battle castle that's animated. Grim's calm and hearty voice rang in the air. What's wrong, Frid? Is this your final trump card against me? If that's the case, then you've really disappointed me. Don't look down on my Fort Cothran. Today, I'll completely end your footsteps here. The central continent belongs to us, to all the Magus families. A fellow like you should never have been born in the central continent. So, in the name of the chairman of the Scattered Tower Forest Association, I order you, get out of the territory of the Scattered Tower Forest, get out of the central continent. Following Frid's roar, the animated Fort Cothran roared towards the sky like a ferocious giant beast. The thick rock pillars that served as its limbs even smashed into the ground, creating two deep pits. In the next moment, it roared and grabbed two lumps of mud from the ground. With a flash of yellow light, the mud turned into rocks as hard as steel. Asterisk whoosh, asterisk the wind howled. Two rock cannonballs smashed towards the crimson flagship, the Viscero, 10 miles away like meteors. The body of Fort Cothran, which had been animated into a giant beast, was at least 1,000 meters in size, and the rocks that it had condensed into were also tens of meters in diameter. The friction between the giant rocks and the air caused blinding sparks to ignite on the outside of the rocks. It was as if two fiery meteors had rushed into the sky. Although the giant floating ships were known as giant ships, the total length from the head to the tail was only 200 meters. If one were to be hit by such a giant rock, they would not be smashed to pieces. At the very least, their waist would be broken and they would crash on the spot. Counterattack! Counterattack! Quick! Put up the defensive barrier. Fire the cannons. The 7 giant floating ships dodged with all their might in midair, and ear-piercing roars could be heard in the command hall of each of the giant ships. Full defensive barriers were put up. Due to the fact that they were of the same origin, these barriers even fused with each other, and the level of protection in the area was obviously increased. At the front of all the ships, the concentrated magic cannons lit up and shot out energy fireballs that were as dense as rain. The rain of fireballs and the fiery meteors collided midway, instantly exploding into dense fireworks and a sea of fire. When the giant fiery meteors passed through the explosion zone, they had already broken into pieces and exploded into a meteor shower that flew in all directions. Without the threat of their huge bodies, the scattered meteor shower did not cause any visible damage to the Crimson Fleet other than creating some ripples when they collided with the protective shield. However, the falling meteor shower did cause a lot of damage to the buildings and fortifications of the Enum family, as well as the magic machine army that had no cover. Grimm sat high in the Viscero flagship, silently watching the ferocious giant beast that was baring its fangs and brandishing its claws. On the projection in his retina, the AI chip projected a three-dimensional image that was slowly rotating. According to the AI chip's classification of energy, this strange giant beast was already at the peak of rank 4. In this aspect, it was far stronger than the initial rank 4 Golem Dragon. More importantly, it was bigger and stronger. If the Golem Dragon were to face it alone, it would probably be skinned alive and smashed into scrap metal in less than a quarter of an hour. However, according to the AI chip's calculations, this did not seem to be the limit of the giant beast's strength. If that Freed was ruthless enough and was willing to fuse with the animated Kothrin, then the giant beast could even display the strength of a peak rank 4. In other words, Freed could also temporarily display a terrifying might that was not inferior to an ultimate being. Ultimate being? Lately, it seemed that the ultimate being was becoming less and less valuable. Any random fellow that popped out of nowhere dared to say that they were on par with the ultimate being. Grimm grumbled gloomily. Chapter 1320. The more Grimm thought about it, the angrier he got. But he had never lowered his head to reflect on it. If he had not pressured Fred so much, how could he have shown such a trump card? Fred himself was only at the mid-tier of grade 4, and as his lifespan approached its end, his strength was declining instead of rising. He was already showing signs of weakening. Moreover, forcefully fusing with Fort Kothrin was not without a price. The price was so great that even Fred had to think about it carefully. After Fort Kothrin was activated, its power source was provided by a source of mana somewhere underground. It could not leave the area within 5 miles of the ley line node. Moreover, every time Fred forcefully fused with Fort Kothrin, he had to pay the price of 100 years of his life. To be honest, Fred could not afford to pay such a price. He was now 700 or 800 years old, and he had less than 200 years left to live. If he were to waste another 100 years, it would mean that his life would soon come to an end. It was because of these concerns that Fred did not dare to try this method of pushing his strength to the pinnacle of grade 4, even though he had researched this method. Even if the Crimson Fleet had reached the origin of the Enum family, Fred still hoped that he could use the activated castle to repel the enemy instead of forcefully fusing with Fort Kothrin. Unless it was absolutely necessary, he really did not want to use such a decisive move. As if noticing Fred's embarrassment, Grimm's hand glowed with a red light. His lips moved slightly as he silently sent out a few words. Soon, the magic puppets beneath the Crimson Fleet sped up and overtook the magic mechanical legion, striding toward Fort Kothrin that had transformed into a giant life form. And it was not the only grade 4 creature that had entered the battlefield. In the sky, a loud and clear dragon roar resounded. At the edge of a floating warship, the smooth and perfect body of the grade 4 lightning lord arms appeared. It opened its mouth and let out a dragon roar, spreading its majestic draconic aura across the sky and earth. Then, it flapped its wings and dove down from the warship. A grade 4 magical machine of war and a grade 4 dragon lord. In the towering Fort Kothrin, the old, stooped Fred was sitting on a tall stone chair, his hands caressing the strange crystals embedded in the armrest to control this humongous life form. Seeing a powerful opponent coming from the ground and a powerful opponent diving down from the sky, Fred's face slowly turned pale. He lowered his head to look at the rune crystal hanging in front of his chest. He clenched his teeth for a long time, unable to make up his mind. In the end, he gave up on the urge to fuse. He grabbed the two central control crystals and began to fight back fiercely. At this time, Fort Cothran was like a huge beast. With a roar, its two thick stone legs suddenly stopped, and rows of thick stone pillars rose in the path of the golem dragon, temporarily blocking it. Seizing the opportunity, it focused all its attention on the Tier 4 dragon that was diving at high speed. After being activated, Kesslin Castle was over 1,000 meters in size. Meanwhile, the Tier 4 Thunderlord, arms, was only 35 meters long when fully extended. However, Fred was on full alert, as if he was facing a formidable enemy. The reason was none other than his strength. After being activated, Kesslin Castle was extremely huge, and its strength was astonishing. Such a colossus was naturally as unstoppable as a heavenly god against low-grade creatures, crushing them like rotten twigs. However, once it faced a powerful opponent of the same level, it would be unable to move, and the opponent would find an opening to attack. Kesslin Castle was powerful, but it was useless if it could not hit the enemy. Under Fred's control, the woodmen of Fort Kurslin stood up like a ferocious giant beast. Their two thick legs were like inverted mountain peaks as they swept across fiercely. Although its movements were slow and sluggish, its huge body and violent strength caused its every move to be accompanied by an irresistible wild hurricane. Ordinary magical creatures would be crushed instantly if they were swept by the edge of the violent hurricane, let alone being hit by the giant legs. At this time, the terrifying power of the Tier 4 dragon, a top predator, was reflected. The Tier 4 Thunderlord, arms, was like a bolt of blue lightning, weaving between the two mountains. The violent lightning around its body transformed into dancing silver snakes, jumping and exploding between the mountains. Every time it exploded with power, tons of gravel would fall from the stone pillars. The entire upper body of the ferocious behemoth was covered in a rain of rocks that never stopped falling. One was a 1,000-meter-tall ferocious beast, while the other was a 35-meter-long blue dragon. From afar, it looked like a mastiff chasing after a dragonfly. Although the ferocious behemoth had the absolute advantage in all aspects, after a round of battle, Kesslin Castle, which had the advantage in size, was at a disadvantage. Intentionally or unintentionally, the Tier 4 Thunderlord, arms, focused his attacks on Kesslin Castle, where the ferocious behemoth's head was. Unfortunately, Kesslin Castle's defenses were tight, and its two thick front limbs kept chasing after arms. Many times, arms would rather use its giant claws to block the Thunder Dragon's attacks than let a single strand of lightning fall on Kesslin Castle. Just like that, the two sides fought fiercely. The dragon's breath was fast and concentrated, and its power was above average even among most Tier 4 magical creatures. The rank 4 Thunder Dragon circled around the surface of its body, bathing it with its terrifying lightning dragon breath. Even the iron rock that Cothran Castle had condensed turned red under the bombardment of extreme power, heated up, and then softened into flowing lava, peeling off the huge body of Cothran Castle. With just one long and fierce dragon's breath, Kesslin Castle had been successfully slimmed down by the enemy. Although the 1,000-meter-tall body had lost a small part of its size, it was still painful for Fred, who controlled Kesslin Castle. Therefore, the ferocious behemoth pounced and bit even more violently. However, at that moment, the puppet dragon had already smashed through more than 10 stone pillars blocking its way and rushed to the edge of the battlefield. The two terrifying magic cannons on its back fired continuously, and scorching red fireballs bombarded the ferocious behemoth's body, exploding into a large number of fireworks. Tons of gravel and rocks poured down like a mudslide, and the terrifying scene made one's heart tremble. Faced with a pincer attack, the ferocious behemoth turned its body, giving up on the dragon, and suddenly pounced towards the puppet dragon. The puppet dragon, which was charging forward with an indomitable will, was also taken aback. It retreated without a fight, and, as it ran away, it baptized its opponent's body with concentrated cannon fire. The huge, ferocious behemoth only chased for a short distance before it stopped, and then turned around and pounced back, as if it did not dare to leave the giant pit it crawled out of. Seeing this, the Crimson family mages naturally guessed that the giant pit must be hiding a secret that the other party did not want people to know about. Therefore, many floating ships began to move forward slowly and used the magic cannons to join in the siege of Kesslin Castle. Beams of powerful light imbued with terrifying energy, magic bullets that whistled as they pounced, and rapid sorcery that shone like fireworks. Almost in an instant, the ferocious behemoth's huge stone body was drowned in it. Inside the ferocious behemoth's raised head, the mages of the Intim family hiding in Kesslin Castle gritted their teeth and fought back bravely with sorcery. The brilliant and ferocious sorcery intertwined in the air, exchanging terrible damage with each other. In such a terrifying battlefield, the low-level mages could not intervene at all and could only be squeezed tens of miles away, fighting with the Magic Legion. Only those with strong defensive shields or high-level strength had the right to step into the main battlefield and join in the siege of the fallen enemy. In an instant, the whole battlefield was filled with flames, and roars were heard. Terrifying shock waves formed from the explosion of elemental sorcery were everywhere. After struggling for half an hour, they were played around by the enemies and did not even get a decent loot. Fred, who was controlling Kesslin Castle, was furious. Looking at the ferocious enemies, his heart was filled with hatred, and he finally made a decision. He stabbed his left hand into his chest and yelled as he opened a big wound, but strangely, no blood gushed out from the wound. Fred gritted his teeth, grabbed the rune crystal, and stabbed it into his heart. Forbidden spell, life combination. As Fred screamed the spell, the magic runes and lines on the rune crystal that was inserted into his heart lit up one after another, outlining an unusually complicated and mysterious sorcery formation. The moment the sorcery formation completely lit up, Fred trembled violently, and his entire body and face aged at a speed visible to the naked eye. His exposed skin was instantly covered with wrinkles and huge molds, and it was as dry as a tree branch in winter. However, under the communication of the strange rune crystal, there was no longer any obstruction between him and the mountainous Kesslin Castle. Their consciousness and aura blended with each other, and there was no longer any distinction between them. Suddenly, Kothrenberg froze. The ferocious giant beast protected Kesslin Castle under its arms, silently enduring the torrential baptism of the violent dragon's breath, giant magic cannons, and rapid-fire cannons without moving. Tons of broken rocks peeled off and collapsed, piling up into a rising hill under the ferocious giant beast's body. Kesslin Castle seemed to have come to life again, and it slowly sank into the ferocious giant beast's stone body, disappearing without a trace. The next moment, the ferocious giant beast suddenly resurrected. It stood up abruptly and turned into a towering human form. The rocks covering its body were constantly breaking and wriggling, piecing together and condensing together, gradually outlining a humanoid head, body, and limbs. And as these rocks were constantly waved and twisted, its movements were jerky and clumsy at first, then became more and more skillful and swift. And the powerful aura that rose from its body was even more violent, thick, and heavy, making it difficult for people to think of fighting against it. Peak of Grade 4. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.